Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff. This week on the show, we are finally doing one of our most long-promised episodes, which is a in-depth retrospective of the Steven Moffat era of Doctor Who. I want to say this is by far the most preparation I have ever put into one of these podcasts. I have been working on my notes and everything for this for about 6 months.
Right.
Because one of the things we're going to be doing as part of this retrospective is I have rewatched and ranked, and I have written about, and there will be a written version of this accompanying this podcast at some point, all 39 stories that Mr. Steven Moffat has contributed to Doctor Who, not just through his 6-year tenure, but also during the Russell T Davies years. And we are going to talk through all of them. All right, so before I reveal my rankings, Sean, let's do a quick recap of how I did this. What I did is, starting back, it's been months ago now, I started with the 11th hour, and I opened a notes document on my phone. I usually take notes on my laptop, but this was enough that I was going to be watching enough TV, I didn't want my laptop with me at all times. So I started on my phone, and I wrote down the 11th hour, because I was the only one. And then the next one is The Beast Below. And I'm like, is it better or worse than the 11th hour? Clearly, that one's worse. So put that one below. And then it's, after that, Time of the Angels. It's like, or that two-parter. If it's a two-parter, ranking them together. It's like, where does that go? And I just did that and did that. It was pretty easy early on. It got a lot harder once I had 30-plus stories to rank. And then when that was all done and I'd reached The Doctor Falls, which is the last episode as of now, I put them all in a Word document, and I tinkered with it, and I have done written explanations of all of them, which whenever I do a list, it helps me to at least write something, because it puts my thoughts down, and then I'll be like, you know what, this one should be higher, or this one should be lower. And I tinkered.
Did you also do the RTD ones?
Yes, and I should say it in between, on days when we were between seasons or something, I would go back and watch the RTD ones out of context, and I would put them in the same way.
Okay.
So yeah, that's... but I've also seen those ones so many times, they were easier to rank.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so there are 39 stories as of now that Steven Moffat has written. I believe that accounts for 47 or 48 episodes. I forget how many two-parters there are.
Wikipedia says 47 episodes, including Twice Upon a Time.
Okay.
So 46.
Okay, so and when we add Twice Upon a Time in, and I will republish this list when we add that one, so it's an even 40.
Okay.
But so there will be an even 40 eventually, but we're doing 39 for now. And look, my number 39 and my number 1 aren't going to surprise anyone. Maybe we'll have some fun in the middle.
Yeah.
39 is The Wedding of River Song.
Yeah.
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 First, a compliment. The scene where we honor the late Nicholas Courtney and Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, it is perfect, it is beautiful, it makes me cry, especially now that I know that character so well. So there's that.
Yeah.
It's literally no episode on this list is worthless.
Oh, yeah, no, even his worst episodes are still interesting.
But this is his worst episode.
Yes.
It is an incoherent mess of a script. It not only has no clear sense of identity, it changes its identity 6 times. It starts as a riff on Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's going through the cave to find Dorian's head, and then it's a ball of all this terrible timey-wimey nonsense with the frozen time, and then we're in Egypt with the pyramids. We have something akin to a central monster with the silence, but they barely remember to use them. There's some weird political revolution story in there with Amy and Rory. Oh, and Amy and Rory have, once again, for the 45th time in 2 seasons, forgotten they love each other and have to fall in love again.
Right.
So that happens again.
Rory dies again.
Rory dies again. Also, and so there's all this attention deficit nonsense to the episode where it's all over the map, and it feels like it's all there to cover up for the fact that Moffat threw a really hard swing in the season premiere and had no idea how to resolve it.
Yeah.
Because the ending is just incoherent. I didn't realize how many plot holes there are in Series 6 until I watched this one. Sean, why does River have to be an astronaut to kill the Doctor?
Because it looks really cool.
Why does River have to kill the Doctor at all if it's just a special weapon in the astronaut suit that does it?
Because it looks really cool.
If it weren't for timey-wimey anti-logic, how would the silence have ever lured the Doctor to the lake and killed him in the first place?
Yeah, no, that one has no answer. It's a fixed point in time, Jonathan.
Yeah, this episode is every one of his worst instincts indulged in full. It's bad. It gets worse every time I see it.
Yeah, and for me, it's something of where it's because it's like there's two parts of it. It's like there's the episode on its own where it's like, as you said, it's mostly incoherent. It also just like structurally, it does not have a third act. Like it doesn't have a conclusion act. It just like stops. And like I think the reason why it stops is the other part of the episode, which is that it is the season finale to season 6 that has to resolve the Doctor dying and the River Song arc and all that stuff. And overall, like I really, in rewatching season 6 and like rewatching all of these, I've really enjoyed like seeing all the River Song stuff because it's the first time I've gone back and seen all that since The Husbands of River Song, which is the last one with Peter Capaldi, which is a great River Song story. And it's been interesting seeing those bits and pieces and kind of now having like a better context for putting things together. I feel like I have a much better sense of the broader story being told there. But then what Writing of River Song is so bad and so nonsense and feels like it has to deal with so much that it can't deal with the relationship between the Doctor and River Song, which is what the episode should be about, and it's not about that at all. And the most infuriating thing about it is that there is so a great fucking second half to season 6 that could have been written that like would have resolved that plot point, which would have been to have the fucking Ganger Doctor, which they set up in the Rebel Flesh 2-parter, and just like literally like they should have just spent the entirety of season 6B where you were not following the Doctor, you were following the Ganger Doctor for all of those episodes, and that would be why he's wearing a different coat and shit, like for like no reason that he barely uses. It's only in like 3 of the episodes in season 6B. And it just feels like there's all these bits and pieces that would have been like, yeah, you could have killed the Doctor, had this version of the Doctor like fucking straight up die and resolve that plot arc and have it felt like that it had consequences that then colors the Doctor in an interesting way and does all these things and tells like this bold, weird story where you didn't even follow like the actual, like the quote unquote actual main character for a portion of the show, which feels like rewatching it exactly what they had planned. It feels so much like that is what was supposed to be set up, and then all of a sudden in Let's Kill Hitler they introduced the Tesselector robot and then just use that as a get out of jail free card instead of having like picked up all the pieces that they had set up before. Because even having like this big jump in Good Man Goes to War where the Doctor leaves and you don't know, and like you break continuity with him of like you don't know where he goes, he's not with anybody else, there's nobody to check him, that is the perfect story opportunity to then swap that character. Like everything is set up to do that, and Steven Moffat just doesn't do it. I have no idea if that is what was planned, and for some reason he didn't do it. I have no idea what happened.
It's really weird because season 6, I was reading about this, it actually was shot all in one block. It was not shot as 2 halves. Like some episodes from the second half were actually shot much earlier in the shoot. Like Night Terrors was shot to be the original episode 3, and they moved them all around. Like that season, all the non-arc episodes were basically originally in different places. Like that season went out on shuffle, basically. So there was no opportunity to change. Like at the time, I was predicting like, maybe he saw online people had guessed it was the Ganger and he changed it, but that was impossible. They were all written and shot before anything aired. So, like, it's an inexplicable decision because you're right. The Ganger stuff is a 2-parter.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the season. It's a good 2-parter, too.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, it is inexplicable. It's bad. And when you get to Let's Kill Hitler and they have the Tesselector there, and I just remember when it aired, I was like, please don't. Like, I know what you're setting up. This is so much lamer.
Yeah. Yeah. Wedding River Song, really fucking bad.
38. The Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe. Or as I call it every time, it started out ironic, and then at a certain point I forgot the episode had a real title. I always call it The Doctor, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's not, she's not a witch, she's a widow, but not really because the husband comes back at the end and nothing in the episode meant anything.
That's true.
This episode is just the most boring Steven Moffat episode by far, because there are other bad ones.
I would agree.
The Wedding of River Song is many things. It is not boring.
Yeah.
The Name of the Doctor is many things. It's not dull. Like, things happen in these episodes. Sometimes they make you want to pull your hair out when it's not working, but things happen. The Doctor, the Wind, and the Wardrobe has good, like, the first 10 minutes I like, where, like, Matt Smith crashes to Earth, and the Claire Skinner character helps him, and then he comes back to help her and the children, and there's some really fun scenes with them. And Matt Smith does have one really great speech about, he says, because every time you see them happy, you remember how sad they're going to be, and it breaks your heart. Because what's the point in them being happy now if they're going to be sad later? The answer is, of course, because they're going to be sad later.
Yeah.
No episode that has that line in it can be all bad. But after that scene, like, nothing happens for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, it's
They're
like
in a
the
forest.
whole middle, like the plot of the episode is the most forgettable, boring shit.
Yeah. There's basically two kinds of Steven Moffat Christmas specials. There's really good ones. And then there's ones like this where it feels like, oh, fuck, I have to write a Christmas special.
Yeah.
And RTD was the same way, by the way. Because the Christmas special is like an extra episode you have to write. I'm sure it's very difficult. But yeah, that's the worst one.
Yeah, I agree. That's like, and I like the ending stuff in the episode as well.
Yeah.
Like, I like the last couple of scenes of the last scene with the sort of his female co-lead in that episode talking to the Doctor and convincing him to go meet up with Amy and Rory again for Christmas in that last scene of the episode. I really like those.
I do like that a lot.
But that whole middle portion is fucking boring.
Yeah, like, I think this one maybe has higher highs than some that are higher on the list, but it's also a 60-minute episode with a lot of
It's
filling.
very tedious.
So number 37 is The Name of the Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And here's the thing. This episode is bad in part because it's the culmination of a lot of bad story arcs.
Yes.
Clara's ill-defined role as the Impossible Girl, the mystery of the Doctor's name, the identity of Trenzalore, all of that. Even with all of that in mind, though, The Name of the Doctor is weirdly a bit better than I think it had any right to be. You have a great performance from Matt Smith.
Yeah.
The direction and production design is outstanding. Murray Gold's score here is so good that it comes back in, I think, Matt Smith's final scene. Like some of the cues he wrote here. And I love the last scene. The reveal of the War Doctor is very good. But there's so little substance to the underlying story that it just doesn't make much of an impression. It's more like a bit of throat clearing, like I just did before we get to the big episodes to come.
Yeah.
But it feels like an episode where they just, over the course of Series 7, he boxed himself in and boxed himself in and boxed himself in. And then we get to this episode that kind of makes no sense, because also the events of it would be impossible based on the events of the time of the Doctor, because he doesn't die at Trenzalore.
Right, yeah.
So, also, what does it mean to walk into your own time stream?
I don't I don't know.
It's such
it
gibberish.
means you go into a sound stage with the fog machine and a bunch of people dressed up as Tom Baker and shit running around. That's what it means to jump into your own time stream.
Any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of boring. Like, it makes no sense. It does have that really great scene of like back-to-back scenes of with Matt Smith of like how he enters the episode of the two kids that are never seen again. I mean, they're not even seen in this episode, but that have tricked him into playing Blind Man's Bust so that they can go to the movie theater, and so he's just joking around, and then Clara tells him the stuff, and then it's the Doctor sort of realizing, I have to go to Trenzalore now.
Matt Smith is so good in this one.
It's so good. It's such a good like two little like beats for the Doctor to play back to back. But yeah, like other than that, like that's my favorite part about this. Other than that, it's like, especially when it's like it all feels like it culminates in nothing, because as you said, the time of the Doctor sort of erases the events of this and changes this future.
And also, this is just a build up to the day of the Doctor. Like, that's all this whole story arc was the reveal of John Hurt, which ultimately, we love John Hurt in that episode. This was just a bad way to get there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, this episode has everybody getting high and meeting in a dream. Let's not forget that.
It's so fucking inexplicable.
36 is our first two-parter, and it's The Impossible Astronaut, Day of the Moon.
Okay, I would have put this higher.
I have these low because I liked them at the time. Rewatching them, I think episode 1 has a lot of good showmanship. Like, everything up through the Doctor's death, it's really well staged and acted and all of that. Beautiful photography out in the Mojave Desert and all that. But you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It means nothing knowing that the story went nowhere. River Song is literally acting through the whole scene because she knows what's happening. Like, it's really hard for me to emotionally invest in it the way I once did. And the rest of the story in part 1 and all the stuff in Day of the Moon is just a slog to me. I don't think the Silence come across as a great villain on their own. I think this story, because it's so consumed with setting up plot arc stuff that I know there's a story in here about the Silence like doing an evil thing and the Doctor defeats them. I don't know. I can never get a hang on that. Like it's buried by other things, and by the end, I just want to move on to the next episodes. I also don't like their weird Nixon and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah.
But I don't know. It's fine. It's got some good things. But this one, I would have, in memory, I would have ranked it higher. When I rewatched it, it was like, I'm bored. Especially because it's setting up plot stuff I don't care about. Because, like, the middle episodes, which are going to be a lot higher, Let's Kill Hitler and Good Man Goes to War, those survive for me because they're about River Song.
Right.
And all the Death of the Doctor stuff is barely touched on. And they're about, like, Amy and Rory, and all that stuff works really well. These two just, I don't know, it doesn't work. It feels like warmed over Moffat leftovers, especially with the Silence, are just another version of the Angels and stuff like that.
Sure, like, I think I enjoy these episodes more. I think the second one, Day of the Moon, is more just like kind of whatever to me, because it feels like that because it's particularly Impossible Astronaut builds to this really powerful sort of like cliffhanger where Amy shoots the girl in the we know is going to be River Song in the astronaut suit and all that stuff. And I think there's a lot of like Impossible Astronaut sets up a lot of interesting character stuff, and much of it doesn't really pay off in the season ultimately, but I do think even knowing that it doesn't pay off for me when I rewatch Impossible Astronaut, I still find it in like an exciting, engaging episode. I also think like Mark Sheppard is really fucking good in these two. I
like his character, yeah.
And whatever, like that dude. I think he's got a lot of really good dialogue and is really funny.
The FBI agent.
Yeah. And so that I think there's a really good sense of momentum and pacing to Impossible Astronaut. It's Day of the Moon is what drags it down for me, because it has those elements of like, it's so busy kind of like dealing with like setting up the full like Doctor dies arc for season 6 that it doesn't have enough time to focus on the actual like plot of the episode itself with the Silence. And it has all this weird shit of having to like, the resolution to the cliffhanger from the end of Impossible Astronaut is non-existent because it just skips ahead like 6 months or whatever. It like that's
also, I hate that kind of Moffat stuff where we just make random jumps in time and we don't know what the characters have been up to, and it's like you never really fully account for what they would have emotionally gone through in that time. You can do it with the Doctor, that's fine. He goes off in his TARDIS and fucks around. You can't do it with Amy and Rory. Like, really, they were stranded in America for 6 months hunting Silence, and we never mentioned that again? Bullshit.
Yeah. So if like I could separate these two, I would put the Impossible Astronaut higher on this list, but like together, I could maybe see them being this low. I think there's a couple of that I would put below this.
35 is Last Christmas. The 12th,
really?
Yes, this is the lowest. I don't like this one, and I
really like this one.
Then I want to talk about it with you
because I haven't watched. I've seen it twice. I haven't watched it this like new walkthrough.
I didn't like it when it aired, and I think I was on the record with that. Or I liked parts of it because I shouldn't say I don't think this one's terrible. It's one of the few like. You'll see as we go along with this list, episodes that I have been critical of in the past are higher in some cases. Episodes I've loved are lower in some cases. I really forced myself to try to reevaluate. Last Christmas is one that, like, it has the strengths I remembered it having, and it has the weaknesses I remembered it having. So here's the strengths. Plus column, you have Nick Frost as Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And that's just as wonderful as you'd expect. And I think the closing scenes to the episode, where they're like in the sleigh and everyone's waking back up, and then the final stuff with the Doctor and Clara, thrilling and poignant and lovely, and I like all that. But I think the rest of the episode is a pretty sloppy script. I think the middle portion, kind of like with the Doctor, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is just very bland to me.
The Wardrobe, by the way.
Yeah, I'm not going back to it. We already missed it. But the middle of the episode is just this big Inception riff that spends so... This is the thing you might have forgotten about, Sean. It spends so much time on exposition about dream states, where Moffat thinks he is so clever about figuring out, like, what if it was a dream? And, like, Peter Capaldi has to say really bad exposition over and over again for us to get that point. It's very bland in the middle for me. And then the other thing that's awkward when you go back to it now is that the episode is really back and forth on how it's going to treat the Dr. Clara dynamic, and that is understandable from a real-world perspective. Jenna Coleman, at the time of this episode's writing, was really waffling on whether or not she was going to return for Series 9. So while writing, Moffat didn't know if this was her last episode or setting up for another season.
Right.
And so, like, literally, you get to, like, I like the last scene with Doctor and the elderly Clara, but it really plays when you know that like a really awkward vestige of a script that assumed this was her last episode, because that was the last scene of the episode. Yeah. And I think that would have been a really kind of wrong-headed exit for Clara if that had been it. Like, thank God she stayed on. We got Series 9. But it just feels like, you know, the overall goal on a character level of Last Christmas is that Season 8 leaves the characters in a really emotionally wounded space. We have to get them back to some level of equilibrium before Series 9 starts. And this is kind of how we get there. I think the story, like the base Under Siege thing it does, is not a very good version of that. I like Santa. I think there's some good character moments. But there, even we get back into like the middle of the episode is this whole stretch where Clara is in a dream with Danny and she doesn't know it's real. And he does this in another episode that we'll talk about later, where that kind of storytelling doesn't work for me unless we are with her on that. Like, we also aren't sure if it's real. Otherwise, it's like it's a lot of waiting for her to realize she's dreaming. And then we just get back to, oh, he's woken up and he has to do all the exposition again. I just think it's a clunky script. I want to like it more than I do. I
think for me, because I would maybe agree with some of those issues. Again, like, it's not as fresh for me as it is for you. But I think I really like what they do with the character stuff in it. I think the way that they get... Because I think some of that stuff that they do with, like, Clara having the dream about having, like, that Christmas with Danny, and it's particularly... It's, like, the name of the episode and, like, the thesis of the episode about Last Christmas, that every Christmas is Last Christmas, is so good at setting up Season 9 and of, like, pushing Clara into the headspace she's going to be in Season 9 and getting her and the Doctor back together, which is putting them in this place of, like, being like, fuck it. Like, and that's where they are. It's just like, fuck it. Every Christmas is Last Christmas. Like, we never know when this is going to end. And it's particularly having that last scene where Clara has this, basically has this, like, vision of living this life, like, mostly alone because she never gets together with anybody else, and like the Doctor doesn't come back because he comes back too late, because the Doctor always comes back too late, and having that life and living kind of like this is old lonely life as an old woman, and then getting to like sort of like set the reset button on that and see like, no, I need to live for the moment, like even if it's going to be dangerous, even if I'm probably going to die, even if like, you know, all these things, I have to live for this moment because every Christmas is Last Christmas. That really works for me in this episode a lot, because it's something that like I actually got more positive on it when I watched it the second time.
Okay, and you know, I don't disagree with any of that. I think it works better on paper than in execution. Like, I think there's a lot of dead air in this one to me, but no, I mean it does what it needs to do to get us there, and I think those moments that hit the way they need to hit, and that's important. Like, we're already kind of past the point where we have episodes that I actively dislike. That's really only the ones we talked about up to this point. I don't hate this episode or anything.
Yeah.
And I in the written version of this list, I have a quote for every episode just for fun. And I do love the one for this one, which is, there's a horror movie called Alien. That's really offensive. No wonder everyone keeps invading you.
Yeah.
It's one of the great 12th Doctor lines.
Yeah, I was going to mention that line, so I'm glad that you did.
Yeah. 34 is The Beast Below.
Okay, yeah. This is, I would have put this lower.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is just a forgettable episode. It's the one from Season 5 that you forgot Moffat wrote.
Mm-hmm. Because all of his other... I literally, that happened. I watched it, and then I was like, wait, what? So I saw the credits, I was like, wait, what? Because I even missed it at the beginning. I caught it in the end credits. I was like, fucking no, he didn't. And I looked it up, and then it was like, I unlocked this, like, it was like I traveled, or like I opened this door to another timeline where I remembered that, because I remembered remembering that, and then I remembered remembering that, like it was heaven sent or some shit.
It doesn't even feel like a Steven Moffat episode.
No.
Like, it's a weird one. Like, you know, it's basically just a traditional take the companion to the future and solve a mystery in space. I think the mystery is layered on a bit too thick. The episode thinks it's cleverer than it is. The last scene is nice. The nice thing where we have the speech about Amy realizing that, like, the whale is like the Doctor. I like all that. It feels very, as we've said a lot in this podcast, functional rather than good.
Yeah, this is the one episode that, like, what we said before about, like, every single time Steven Moffat like really goes for something, this is the exception to the rule.
And to be fair, he wrote for Season 5, he wrote the most episodes of any season he's done, because Russell T Davies would always do 6 of the 13, and Moffat tried it once in Season 5 and probably said, yeah, I did 6 and one of them was bad, I'm going to do 5 from now on. And then with Capaldi he does 4 plus some co-written ones. So I actually think he made the right choice on that, because you could have just given this slot to a different writer and it probably would have been more interesting. I think he just spread himself too thin. 33 is The Angels Take Manhattan.
Okay, yeah, this is about where I'd put it.
And The Angels Take Manhattan has one of the longer blurbs I wrote for this list. A lot of the ones, especially in the bottom half of the list, I tried to keep to one paragraph. It took me 3 to summarize The Angels Take Manhattan.
It's got a lot of baggage as an episode.
It does, because it excels in a lot of ways, and it fails resoundingly in a lot of ways. And I've seen it 4 times. I still don't know what to make of it. I think the last Amy's farewell scene in the graveyard is spectacular. She is great. Matt Smith is great. Alex Kingston is great. Sadly, Arthur Darvill does not get a final scene, so sorry, Rory.
Yeah, it just disappears.
Just gets zapped out, blah, blah, blah. But then you have that, which is beautiful, and the Doctor's anguish at it is so powerful. It's one of my very favorite Murray Gold cues. That piece is so good. And yet, I do not buy, for a second, any single one of the plot mechanics that gets us to that graveyard, to Amy's final decision. Every narrative step of this episode is all of Moffat's worst timey-wimey impulses. If the whole tragedy hinges on the TARDIS being unable to travel back to New York because of the paradoxes, right? Why can't the Doctor just take the TARDIS to New Jersey, hop in Bessie, and drive over the state line, pick up Amy and Rory, and bring them back? The events of the hour depend on us trusting that all these rules made up completely on the fly over the course of the hour are real and ironclad, and it's just not good enough. It doesn't help that Amy and Rory, I think, had overstayed their welcome at this point. Rory dies again for approximately the 500th time in just 2 seasons. River Song, he was really out of ideas with at this point.
Yeah.
It's got good things, though. It really does. The Angels have not completely been drained of horror. It's a very well-directed episode. Nick Hurren, I think, was the director. He did a bunch. He directed some subpar season 7 episodes, but his episodes are always very well-directed. So, I don't know. It's complicated. It's not terrible. It's not nearly as good as it probably needed to be.
Yeah. And it's also just it feels like an inappropriate conclusion to Amy and Rory's arc. I've always felt that way, and I felt it even more this time, watching all of it, in quick succession.
Yeah.
That it just feels like they fucking found a conclusion for Amy and Rory so many times, and it always felt right to me, the idea of they leave the TARDIS and have a relatively normal life. It felt like every time they landed that conclusion, it worked really well because it's the right conclusion for those characters, and they did it 3 times, and then they just the Angels Take Manhattan tries to have this tragic thing that feels like it doesn't build that tragedy effectively. I can see how Steven Moffat trying to build to the tragedy, but I don't think he does it well. And then the execution of it feels it's something that we said when watching The Angels Take Manhattan, is that when you think about it for more than 2 seconds, it's not a tragic conclusion to the story arc, actually. Which is it's trying to be a tragedy, but doesn't want to be a tragedy, and so it isn't a tragedy, but it's trying to convince you it's a tragedy, and none of that fucking works. It's just confusing.
Yeah, because worst case scenario, they got to go back in time and live their lives to the age of 85.
Yeah, and Amy becomes this successful writer and publisher, and Rory does something probably, I don't know, he's a nurse still.
He's a stay-at-home dad.
Yeah, he's a stay-at-home nurse dad.
Yeah,
yeah.
But even then, if you are convinced it's a sad ending, the mechanics to get you to the sad ending don't work. If we're thinking tragedy, Shakespearean tragedy, Hamlet doesn't work if Hamlet has no motivation for the tragedy, and there's no motivation for what happens in this episode, so it's not good tragedy. So that's my thought on that.
It's just I just so wish that it was just something where the Doctor and Amy and Rory just sort of slowly drifted apart the way they were slowly drifting apart over the course of season 7A, and then it just ultimately ended with the Doctor sort of quietly making this decision to just leave and do the classic Doctor Who thing.
It should have been
still haven't done yet. In modern Doctor Who, they still haven't really just done the Doctor just leaves at some point because he knows it's time for him to leave, and they need to get to doing that again, because even though I think Steven Moffat got very good at doing companion departures with Clara and Bill, although I guess Bill's coming back, we'll see how that works. But generally speaking, for season 9 and season 10, it's still some kind of frustrating to have this need to make it this big storytelling dramatic thing when I think it would be more effective a lot of the time to make it very quiet.
Yeah, you know what my hope is for Bill in the Christmas special, and actually into next year's premiere. Yeah. I want the Doctor. I don't want the Doctor to regenerate alone. I don't like it when that happens, and it really only happened with 10. But it's better when he has someone in the room. And I think Bill should be in the room, and I think she can be like, oh man, you're a woman now, because it's surprising, you know? And then I think it would be really nice if in, like, the first scene of Chris Chibnall's premiere, like, Bill is like, okay, well, you have a good life. I'm going to go back with my space girlfriend, Heather. Yeah. And just, like, give it that nice grace note. Like, it doesn't... And I think that's how Bill will leave either way, whether it's before the Doctor regenerates or not. But, like, she's already left. This is a guest appearance, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, the tangent. All right. Above this line, 33 is the last episode I have, like, significant issues with. I like 32 to 1, and that's pretty crazy. Yeah. Not all of them are perfect. There's ones that have issues, definitely, but the rest of these episodes I like in one way or another. And we start 32 is Asylum of the Daleks.
Okay.
It's a good one. It's not a great one, but it's definitely one of the better Dalek stories in Modern Who.
Yeah.
Which, you know... still, it's interesting. It's the first Dalek story Moffat himself wrote. And you do feel like he has some creativity and energy to it. Like, I really like the general premise of, like, the Daleks have a whole planet of crazy Daleks, and the Doctor gets shot down there. And there's some great horror scenes. Like, there's this one where Rory is, like, with a Dalek that seemingly keeps asking for eggs. It goes, eggs. Yeah. And Rory's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Exterminate! And that's a great Dalek moment. Yeah. And there's just a lot of fun ones like that. Issues with this story, it's really held back by Amy and Rory fatigue. This is the one where they almost get divorced, but then they rediscover their undying love again. It's got a sheer barrage of Doctor Who puns at the end. But you take some of that out. I like the central story. I like the introduction of Jenna Coleman here. I mean, the whole story arc doesn't work perfectly, but she's good in the episode, and, like, clearly Matt Smith and the Doctor are way more interested in her than they are Amy and Rory, because they're boring now.
Yeah.
But, like, that's a fun part. It's a good Dalek episode. Not a great one, but I would watch it again. It's good.
It's something of where I remember feeling at the time, and then now it's just sort of like, because we just moved on, it's fine. At the time, I remember feeling it was really weird that, like, Scarrow is just there, and it just feels like this Asylum of the Daleks is just this reset button on the Daleks that says, Dalek continuity is done. We're done with it.
Yep.
No more. Like that was something that RTD fucking, like, twisted himself in a pretzel, trying to sort of connect all of his Dalek stories together. Like, Moffat tried that a little bit with, like, Victory of the Daleks, tried the new Dalek, like, design that did not catch on, and so then they kind of went back, and then the Daleks are sort of, like, a little bit in the background in some other episodes in season 5 and 6, and then it's like Asylum of the Daleks, Dalek continuity is over, just like a normal sort of functional, pretty good Dalek story. And then from now on, Scarrow is there, Daleks are there. We just don't have to talk about where they came from anymore.
In general, I mean, Moffat is not that interested in Daleks as Doctor Who writers go. It's clearly not his favorite subject, and good, the Daleks are not the best Doctor Who villains.
Yeah.
They're iconic for a reason, but, you know...
They should be used sparingly.
Yes.
Like, classic Doctor Who has a much better track record with the Daleks than modern Doctor Who. You haven't gotten to the good Dalek stories yet.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm about to see Genesis of the Daleks, and I've been told it's good.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. 31 is The Bells of St. John.
Yeah.
So we just did the 7A premiere. Let's do the 7B premiere. I think the 7B premiere is a little bit better.
I agree.
Mostly because Clara is finally there, and it's not quite the character we're going to know next season with Peter Capaldi, but it at least gives Matt Smith new things to play. It gives the show a new energy. She is really good in this one. There's some great writing. Like, Moffat is clearly having a lot of fun in this one. Like, just the whole scene where I love where the Doctor is waiting outside guarding the house when Clara wakes up. And one, I just love the kind of warmth of that scene, that the Doctor is happy to have a new friend. But then you have some great lines there, like where he says, I assembled a quadricycle, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, a what? He says, I invented the quadricycle. Just some great moments like that. There's the whole thing where they, like, take the TARDIS into the plane that's crashing. It's a really fun adventure. The central threat about evil Wi-Fi mostly sounds like an old man yelling at clouds. But
spoon heads.
Yeah.
Like, one of the many of just the, like, Steven Moffat feels compelled to have to invent a monster when it's like, you don't need a monster in this episode. Maybe the Doctor has that also. It's like, just fucking, it's fine. You don't need a new monster for this.
Zygons and everyone.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I don't have a ton to say about it. I don't think it's a great episode. I always enjoy it, though. It puts a smile on my face.
I recently watched on because I've been watching these on Amazon Prime and my, like, rewatch, because all the Modern Doctor Who is up there. And for season 8, they have these 2, like, special things that Peter Davison did of doing interviews with people talking about, like companions and doctors.
Those were on the Blu-rays. I watched one of them.
Yeah. And he interviews a bunch of people involved with the show, and he interviews Murray Gold about the music. and for talking about the Clara theme in relation to writing themes for companions. And what Murray Gold says in that, and when he's talking about this, they show a clip from the Bells of St. John. That is that kind of scene you're talking about of the Doctor being outside, and I think it's when like the Clara wakes up at night after she's been like put back into her body or whatever, and the Doctor's outside and she talks to him outside of her window, and the Clara theme is playing. And the thing he kept on saying about how he designed the Clara theme was like, I wanted it to be like feel like light and fun and fresh. Like I wanted to feel fresh, and that word fresh, that's how I think of Bells of St. John. It's like it's a fresh episode of Doctor Who that like is removed from like a lot of the baggage of like the Amy and Rory stuff, and like the Doctor being so like the 11th Doctor being so attached to them, that Bells of St. John just is like, it's not the best episode in the world, but it feels very fresh and new and just like light and fun and exciting, and it's a little adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. So number 30, this is the episode that it's not the absolute hardest one for me to rank, but it's up there because this is an episode with some exceptionally high highs and some weirdly low lows, and it represents this interesting pivot point in the history of the show. And number 30 is Deep Breath, the 12th Doctor's first story. And it's hard to talk about because I didn't like it at the time. Rewatched it. I think it signposts the 12th Doctor's era way more than I remembered. Like, it is a thesis statement for that era. And when it is being that thesis statement, it is outstanding. Like, Peter Capaldi is amazing in this. Jenna Coleman is amazing in this. Like, some of the writing, like, this is where Steven Moffat starts writing, like, where the word beautiful showed up over and over again in my pieces here, because I just think some of his writing is beautiful. Like, with, you know, the Who Frowned Me This Face scene. Or the final scene with the Doctor and Clara, like, I need you to see me. Just see me. Things like that, where it's just the characters talking, and how he starts getting into, like, basic human character psychology, albeit one of them is an alien, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's really good, and I like all the existential musings here. I think the scene where the Doctor tells Clara he's not her boyfriend is way more important than I remembered, because I forgot they were clearly heading towards a Dr. Clara romance in 7B.
Yeah, like, I mean, Time of the Doctor, literally, like, when they go to the town and they have like the truth field, she like literally one of the things she's about to say is like, oh, and I fancy him, and then she stops herself. It's like they're absolutely setting up a relationship between the two.
And I kind of like, thank God Matt Smith left and stopped that.
Yeah,
like,
it would have been the fucking worst.
And so they don't. And it's like a lot of this episode when the Doctor is like reaching into himself feels like Steven Moffat reaching into himself and saying, what do I truly value as a writer of this show? And Deep Breath plants a flag for that.
Yeah.
But Deep Breath is, at 78 minutes, the longest episode of Doctor Who.
Right.
Single episode. Yeah. I guess it depends on how you define, like, the 5 Doctors, because it aired in a movie, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
At least of modern Who, certainly. It's actually, like, 30 seconds longer than the Day of the Doctor. And, good God, does it not need to be that long?
Yeah.
It is way too long. Virtually every scene in the episode goes on past its breaking point, where it's just like, this is really good. Okay, wrap it up. Okay, oh, you're still going. Like, that's almost every scene. Like, it needed an editor at the writing stage and then at the post-production stage.
Yeah.
And it's like, clearly they wanted another big cinematic event. I don't even know, like, someone might have told Steven Moffat, you need to write an 80-minute episode. And it's not that long. This is like a 50-minute episode stretched out that long. The Paternoster Gang characters, Madame Foster and everyone, are very hit and miss here. You know, so it's just, I think the Matt Smith cameo at the end, I still don't feel good about it. I think, you know, I understand what they're going for, and I understand you have time travel, you can do it. The biggest problem to me isn't like that it's breaking the rules, it's that it's unnecessary. Like, Peter Capaldi is the Doctor, we feel it, we see it. I think the scene where he says, I need you to see me, would play even more powerfully if you didn't have Matt Smith right there. And then there's the whole issue of that, you know, Peter Capaldi is establishing his own gravity at this point. Matt Smith has 3 years of gravity. You shouldn't let that come in and displace the new gravity. And I think, so there's issues like that. I don't know what to say about the story as a whole, because I think overall it's good. I like the main threat. I think the scenes with the Doctor at the end and the Clockwork Man are outstanding. He totally killed that guy. And anyway, you know, so it's got a lot of good stuff. Murray Gold once again restarts the musical tapestry of Doctor Who and does it beautifully. But it's an awkward episode that happens to be really, really good in places.
Yeah, it's something of am like so conflicted about it because it is just like the things that are bad about it to me like feel kind of trifling in some ways, even though it's like it needs an editor. And like, God, there are some scenes that's like, because there's also, it's like, so like a lot of scenes I agree go on too long. There's also some that are just like, why is this even fucking in here? Like there's 2 scenes with Clara and Strax that are utterly pointless.
They do
fucking nothing.
They feel like what you'd see on the deleted scenes on the DVD.
Yeah, exactly. And you look at it and you're like, there's a reason why this is a deleted scene. It adds nothing of value to the episode whatsoever. It just feels like it's in there because it's like, they wanted the longer episode length. But it is like every time I've rewatched it, I like the stuff that's good about it even more. Because I think especially, like you said, it signposts where the 12th Doctor goes, which is obviously something that is impossible to see on the first viewing. But whenever I watch Deep Breath, like I'm both like always amazed by some of the stuff that, like, I don't know like how much of it was intentional that they brought back up later and stuff like that. But this time when I rewatched it, I particularly keyed in on when the dinosaur is there in like roaring in London, and the Doctor is passed out in the bed, and he's in his sleep translating for the dinosaur, which is something that like the Doctor translating stuff and in seeing, and like you seeing that that's how he sees the world has been a continuous theme during his run. It comes up in The Girl Who Died with the Baby, and it comes up in, I can't remember the name of the episode, but in season 10, the episode with the Celts and the Romans.
Yeah, the light eaters of light.
Yeah, Eaters of Light. Yeah, like that episode, like there's a big part of that episode is about how the Doctor's like mastery of language and being able to see things in that way changes his perception of everything. And that's like such a like brilliant little thing that about the Peter Capaldi's era that I did not remember at all was a feature of Deep Breath until I rewatched it again. I was like, oh shit. And it's such a good fucking scene that I had never really keyed in on, but I think it says so much about that character, and like having that concept be revisited a couple of times sort of like helped like unlock that scene for me in some ways. And I always just, when I watch Deep Breath, I always think about that when this episode aired and we did the podcast and like we were both kind of negative on it, but you were a lot more negative than me. And then I went like up to my room with my laptop and just like re-watched like the good scenes in the episode over and over and over again because they are so fucking good. And like what Peter Capaldi does and what the writing does is so bold and powerful that like, I don't know. I'm glad I didn't have to make a list because I don't know where I'm going to rank it. But the stuff that's good is so fucking good.
And I agree with every word you just said. And here was the challenge for me is that I agree. It is a slightly compromised, but overall incredibly sturdy foundation to the era that would follow.
Yeah.
And the question for me became, when you're ranking, things have to go lower and higher. Right. And it's, the stuff that followed, is that more important than Deep Breath enabled all of that? And do I value that more? Or do I just say, I think it got better, even better from here, and rank those higher?
Right.
So, for instance, my next one is a case of that, where I don't think the highs of this next story are as high. But for me, like, it's just the 12th Doctor in full swing. And so, as a story, like, it doesn't have those same compromises. And number 29, this is also our first co-written one, is Time Heist.
Okay,
written with Stephen Thompson. And again, I can... if you wanted to say Deep Breath's a better episode, could 100% buy that argument.
Deep Breath is a better episode.
Okay. Do you understand my logic of why I'm saying this? Because Time Heist, to me, is now you're in full swing, and it's just chugging along, and the 12th Doctor has become a really interesting character. What I liked about Time Heist on this second viewing, and this is one of the ones that convinced me I need to have the co-written ones in here, because, like, Stephen Thompson is one of the credited writers on this. It really is very Steven Moffat-y in a lot of places.
Sure, yeah.
And what I love about this one is it is a typical high-concept 11th or 10th Doctor escapade, filtered through the darker, more grounded personality and worldview of the 12th Doctor, and I like how the episode is constantly leveraging that sense of expectation. So, there's a lot of moments where you can understand, where you can, like, imagine Matt Smith or David Tennant doing the same things or saying the same lines, but then there will be this unexpectedly dark or ruthless flourish that just underlines how wonderfully different Peter Capaldi feels in the role. This is one of those that feels very fresh to me. I like how 12 talks others through their deaths in the face of the Teller through this one. I like the Teller as a monster. I think the writing with him and Clara throughout is astoundingly on point. There's this opening sequence where there's the Doctor is bored and lonely, and he is annoying Clara into coming on an adventure with him. and she doesn't want to because she has stuff to do.
Yeah.
And it's just a great scene. And it's also a heist episode. I like when Doctor Who plays with genre and just is like, we can do whatever we want.
Yep.
I think the twist at the end is a little labored in execution, but I do like the ultimate reveal, the ultimate outcome. As I said, impossible to pinpoint Moffat's exact contributions. But I do think his fingerprints are clearly all over this one, and it just convinced me, like, yeah, I can't ignore this episode on the list because it's part of the evolution too. It's one of the it's one of the early standalone 12 stories, so that's where it landed for me.
Sure.
Okay. Anything else to say about?
Yeah, not because I don't think there's a huge amount to say about Time Heist. It's good.
Yeah. 28 is the return of Dr. Mysterio.
Yeah.
Another 12th Doctor episode, the 2016 Christmas special. It's not a deep episode.
Sure.
It has a great dramatic scene at the end with the Doctor's speech about how everything ends and it's always sad, but everything begins again too, and that's always happy. Be happy. I'll look after everything else. One of the defining 12th Doctor moments.
Yeah.
But the rest of the episode is comedy, and it is really good comedy.
Mm-hmm.
This was the proper debut of Matt Lucas, who there is a character named Nardole in Husbands of River Song.
Right, yeah.
It's effectively, this is his debut, and he's great here. Capaldi is great here. The guest stars Justin Chatwin and Charity Wakefield. I really like both of them in this one. It's, a very thin plot. There's very little thematic substance to speak of, but it's basically a screwball comedy, like a 40s screwball comedy done in a superhero setting, and I think all of that is done really well. The director on this one was Ed Bazalgette, who did a lot in the late 12th Doctor era, and he's so good in this one, like, as a director. Like, there's all these great visual gags. The one that I wrote about here was Lucy, the character who's like the girlfriend, and she's the journalist.
The Lois Lane.
Yeah, the Lois Lane.
Yeah.
She's like undercover at the Harmony Shoal building, and she's like peeking around a corner at the bad guys. And we pan back, and the Doctor is casually leaning against a wall eating sushi, and he leans over and says, yeah, I'm an intruder too. That moment is great. And just beat after beat, this episode is so funny. And after a year off, when we had a full year without Doctor Who, it just felt like such a good return, and it's such a good palate cleanser for Series 10. It does what it needs to do. I don't think it's necessarily the masterpiece of a lot of the episodes we're going to get to, but it's a fun episode.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything you've said. And it's also fun just to have it's a very different kind of Peter Capaldi episode, so it's fun to see him in this very different genre and setting, and he plays it well.
God, you know what? Deep Breath would go higher than both of those, at least.
Yeah.
We'll keep a running tally of where Deep Breath would go above.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say, Deep Breath is better than these two,
But let's talk about that when we get there. But it's just like, do you understand why Deep Breath is so hard to rank?
Like I said, I'm glad I didn't have to make the list because I have no idea where I'd rank Deep Breath because it has some of my favorite scenes and some of my least favorite scenes.
As we go through, let me know, because I'm starting to think here too, when we get to one that definitively is better than Deep Breath.
Okay.
And I'll just make a note, and maybe in the written version I'll change the rankings. 27 is The Pyramid at the End of the World from this last season, written with Peter Harness.
Yeah, Deep Breath is better than this one.
I agree. It's hard, man. There's so many episodes to balance. This is a good one, though. Like, it pales in comparison to Extremis, its immediate predecessor.
Oh, yeah.
We'll get to Extremis. But I still like it. I think it's a worthy follow-up. What I like is it takes the established threat of the monks from Extremis. They're this enemy who have modeled the whole of human history to find a weak point. And I think it has a really smart, clever, interesting premise where the monks are invading at a moment of potentially world-ending crisis, but our characters don't know what that crisis might be. And then in this side story, we see that crisis start to unfold. All of which feels like part of Moffat's contribution to this one, is kind of that overall plot structure. There's some very good writing with the Doctor and with Bill. The big weakness here is you have these characters who are not Unit, but should probably just have been Unit.
Yeah.
And if this had been like Kate Stewart, someone we know, she's not the Brigadier, but we at least know her.
Yeah.
That would at least make a lot of the scenes with the other ancillary characters play better. As it is, the ancillary characters are really thin.
Yeah.
But I still like this one, and I think the climax in which Bill trades away control of the Earth so the Doctor can get his sight back is just tremendous. And it's a tremendous piece of writing because you're both completely aware that Bill is doing something foolish, but also completely understand and forgive her for it.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do as a writer, and I think this episode does that very well. Also don't want to ignore, it's one of the 3 episodes where the Doctor is blind, and it uses that in really interesting ways. It's a very, conventional episode in some ways, but it has all these little grace notes and flourishes that I think make it exceptional in others.
Yeah, it is one of those of it has a lot of really great things in it. It's really good in season 10, but it's a bit sloppy in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think I would personally put The Return of Dr. Mysterio above this as well, but that's like sort of quibbling.
Those were back and forth for me. This one just, when I watched them both, this one felt like it had more weight to me. Also, I think I know where I'm putting Deep Breath. I'll let you know in a minute.
Okay.
26 is Let's Kill Hitler.
Okay, yeah, Deep Breath is better than this.
I agree, but I think I'm putting Deep Breath beneath the one we're about to get to.
Okay,
so
we'll see.
All right, so Let's Kill Hitler, 26. Very fun episode of Doctor Who, but I think I like it more in isolation than I do as part of the larger Series 6 story arc.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Because in that context, it's super wonky. It completely waves away the trauma of Amy and Rory losing their fucking child. It completely ignores the cliffhanger of A Good Man Goes to War, because the Doctor just comes back in his TARDIS and all's fine, kind of. But as its own, like, bombastic time travel adventure, and especially as an origin story for River, which I think it does very well, I think it's a really good episode. I think it's got some very good moments of absurdity. Rory, take Hitler and put him in that cupboard over there.
Yeah.
You know, that's fun. Alex Kingston is great, and I particularly love the second half of this one, where the Doctor is dying and struggling against all the odds to show River this better side of herself that he has seen so many times. And I think the back and forth between him and Alex Kingston is at its best here. Like, for this incarnation at least, they are so good in those scenes. And I do love it as if you just view it as like River Song's origin story, it's very, very good.
Yeah, it's one of those of where it makes you wish that her origin story was set up better. Because it's also the same thing of like, the beginning of the episode is so messy with like introducing this Mel's character that we've never seen before, that have to be convinced of that she's been Amy's and Rory's friend the whole time. That like if that character had just been set up a little bit, it would have been this episode would have been so much better. But yeah, when you look at it in sort of isolation and appreciate, particularly Alex Kingston is so fucking good in this. That was the thing that in this rewatch I really sort of, again, being able to sort of contextualize all of the River Song story. She's so good at portraying this just like totally fucking manic early like new River Song is really interesting.
Yeah. All right, I've rewritten my list a little bit.
Okay.
27 is Let's Kill Hitler. 26 is now Deep Breath.
Okay, what's 25 then?
You can adjust all the numbering for yourself. 25 is the Series 8 finale, Dark Water / Death in Heaven.
Okay, I'm still on the fence with Deep Breath in these two.
Can I make my case?
Okay, go ahead.
I will make my case. The second hour of this, Death in Heaven, is more up and down than the first one.
Definitely.
Because I think Michelle Gomez is great, but Moffat's script doesn't always know how to channel that energy yet. The tone is a little too all over the map. And, that leads to some weird issues where, like, I think the scene where, like, Clara has to deconnect Danny is way too dark for this show.
Right, yeah.
And things like that. But the first hour, I think, is solid gold terrific. I have almost no complaints about it, especially now, like, rewatching it and not having any of the baggage of the time. And I think what it does is it puts it all together with Clara and the Doctor's relationship. Like, that shines throughout. And I think that first hour in particular, in that it opens with the unexpected death of Danny Pink, which felt in some ways wrong at the time, and in retrospect is so thematically on point, because if he died like fighting a Cyberman, it doesn't mean the same thing as it's just a random death in a cruel world.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things Moffat is exploring here. It pushes Jenna Coleman to do some of her best work, the entire sequence in the TARDIS and then in the dream world where she's throwing all the keys away. And then it culminates back in the TARDIS with the Doctor giving this whole speech about, you let me down.
Yeah.
And then she starts to leave and he says, Clara, come back. Do you think I care for you so little that betraying me would make a difference?
Yeah, such a good line.
It's an all-time sequence between the two of them. It's beautiful. It's amazing. And the rest of the episode follows up on that. Like, it really is about they're going to go to hell and back together if they have to.
Yeah.
And what they wind up finding is this weird museum where people are, like, their corpses are held in this watery grave. And it's very creepy. It's when Moffat does horror, he's really good at it. I really hope he comes back to Doctor Who in like 5 years and just writes a horror episode.
Yeah.
Because he's just so fucking good at it. And this one is great throughout on that level. Michelle Gomez, again, the character is not always perfectly calibrated. I was way too hard on her as an actress back when this aired. I think she's really good through these two episodes.
Yeah.
And I think Death in Heaven bites off a little more than it can chew. And I would say Deep Breath does too, when we're talking about these in comparison. But I think what Death in Heaven does in biting off more than it can chew is also biting off all the most important themes of the season, and it does pay off on them. I really like how Missy's like evil plan resolves, which is everything and it's especially good when you've seen seasons 9 and 10 and know what they would do with Missy.
Yeah.
Missy never does something evil for the sake of evil. She's doing it to get closer to the Doctor. She is like that id of the Roger Delgado portrayal that just wanted the Doctor to be his friend made manifest.
Yeah.
And so the end of this is she's built this whole army and gives it to the Doctor. And the Doctor has to finally face that existential moment. Am I a good man? What am I? I'm an idiot in a box. And it's this thing you've talked about over and over on this show. And I think it's really interesting to see the show acknowledge that in the context of the hour in a pretty cool way in that moment, because there's some really good moments with Peter Capaldi there and Jenna Coleman. But throughout these 2 episodes, I think everything it has to say about death and about, grief and where that pushes us, I think all of that is interesting. I think some of the stuff with the nether sphere and heaven and what happens with Danny goes too far, and it's just a too few many things. But I remembered these 2 episodes being like kind of a messy big finale.
Yeah, you didn't like them particularly.
Yeah, and they are messy, but just consistently, like, at least every other scene, and in Dark Water, I think it's every scene, is beautifully written. There's tremendous dialogue. The character moments are great. And I think the ending of Death in Heaven is stupendous, where you have the Doctor and Clara come back in this cafe together, and they both, we see through this beautifully edited flashback, lie to each other, where the Doctor says, I found Gallifrey, and we see he didn't. And Peter Capaldi, in that flashback, just starts like bashing on the TARDIS console, and we've just never seen the Doctor that angry. It's incredible. And Clara confesses, or says that, no, Danny's alive, and we're together now, and I don't need you anymore. And I love that everything that happened this season was so complicated and messy for the 2 of them that literally no one in the universe cares for the other person more than the 2 people sitting at that table, and they can't be honest about their deepest pain. No story that can get to that point honestly and earnestly is a bad story.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculously accomplished story if you can get to that point, because it is a nuanced, complicated piece of writing. And there's just no other season of Doctor Who that ends like that. The last shot is Clara walking away, fade to black. And it hurts. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. And I think, yes, there's some messiness how we get there, but we get there, and we get there organically. And that makes this a really amazing 2-parter to me. Even if I think it has a lot of issues here and there. I think in retrospect, this one rose way higher for me than I would have thought. Yeah. Also, special mention, this is the first one Rachel Talalay ever directed, and she is the best director to work on Modern Who. So
yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad that you've come more around on these, because it's one that I was definitely more on the negatives. I like it a lot more now than I did back then. I remember liking him more than you did, and then on rewatch, I really liked it, because it's something that I feel like they work so well as the finale.
Yes, they do. Yes,
and it was a little bit harder to see that week to week, and I think particularly watching Dark Water and Death in Heaven 1 week apart, that effect is diluted. But yeah, it is a really effective, powerful season finale, and yeah, some of those scenes are really good. But it does have that Death in Heaven has a lot of really messy bits.
Because I think, and here's the thing, it feels like a prototype for the kind of stories he'd tell in seasons 9 and 10, where what Death in Heaven wants to be is a send up or a deconstruction of those big style Doctor Who finales. It wants to promise you that and then give you something else.
Yeah, the way that Hellbent did.
Yeah, the way that Hellbent does, and the Doctor Falls to some degree does, where you think it's going to be bigger than it actually is.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Death in Heaven indulges in the grandeur a little too much.
Yeah, it's a bit too Russell T Davies in terms of its finale-ness.
And I think there was definitely a way to have that. Have that cake and eat it too, where you're making a consistent commentary on it. And the episode just, that one probably needed another pass to fully get there. Or the other way to say it is Moffat had to write this before he could write Hellbent.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's what we get here. So, and if I'm comparing this to Deep Breath, why I would put them there is that this is the resolution of a lot of ideas from Deep Breath.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's this is where it all pays off. And that's why, if I were separating them, it's by inches, but one's higher. So that's me.
Okay, I think I'm fine with that. I think I would almost put them in the same slot in a weird way, because they're very similar to me in terms of their flaws and qualities.
All right, 24 is the one that fell the furthest for me when I rewatched it.
Okay.
And you're going to be surprised, because I know you love this one. And this is the Silence at the Library, Forest of the Damned 2-parter. And I remember liking this one more than I did when I rewatched it. And I'd seen it several times back in the day, but it had been a couple years I rewatched it. The things that are good about it are unassailably good. Alex Kingston is awesome. You know why River Song was an instant hit. Yeah. I wish she and David Tennant had more together.
Yeah, at least one more episode.
Because they're so good. And like, it's literally one of the only points in Doctor Who history where the continuity won't allow for it, because, like, he clearly has not seen her again.
Yeah.
Like, blah, blah, blah. But just do it. It's fun. I want to see more of it. Like, it's like, Big Finish? Get on that. We need that. You've got both David Tennant and Alex Kingston working for you now.
She can be with the 8th Doctor. She can be with the 10th Doctor again.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, so she's great. I think he writes the 10th Doctor very well here. This is one of the better Tennant stories. I think the Vashta Narada are great villains, the villains that are in the shadows, and the best thing about them is how David Tennant says Vashta Narada.
And then there's that great, like, music sting the first time he does it. This is a great David Tennant moment.
Yep. I love the idea of the consciousness echo in the spacesuits. That is one of Moffat's most existentially terrifying ideas. And I think episode 1, like, if I separated these out, Silence in the Library is way higher, because I think it's just a masterclass in tension, creativity, pacing. But I had completely forgotten that this two-parter has a really long, in-depth subplot about a consciousness computer simulation thing.
Dr. Moon and Donna getting trapped in there with, like, the guy with the stutter.
And it's not bad, but I think it's at odds with what the episode is trying to do, and it really distracts me, particularly the stuff with Donna in the second hour. It's what I talked about before. It's a lot of us waiting for Donna to realize what we already know, which is that she's not in the real world. And I think that kind of thing only works if you're with the character on that. We're not with the character, so we're just waiting like most of that hour before Donna finally realizes, oh shit, this is all fucked up. And it's like, it's just too many things for one episode to bite off. And I also don't think it plays to the episode's particular tonal strengths. But the ending is very, very good with the Doctor saving River. There's some beautiful dialogue at the end. I do think in retrospect, that ending for River, knowing River as we do now, seems particularly hellish, that she has to live in a small English countryside village.
Yeah. It's a really hilarious ending because she's like gets to be there with like the 3 or 4 people that were on that trip with her, which like when this is the only time you've seen her, that makes sense because you assume that these people are like her friends and everything. And then now that we know her so well, it's like, who the fuck are these people? Yeah. Why would she want to be with them for more than 1 second?
And to be fair, this is not an issue that affected my ranking or anything.
Yeah, it's just a weird.
Yeah. Like, I think if Moffat wrote this today, she would just die at the end. I think that's what it should be.
Yeah.
I understand why it was the way it was when it was written. So I think it's more compromised than his other RTD-era scripts. It's still very good. I don't want to put it down too far.
Yeah, I mean, it's because we are definitely into the area of the list where it's like...
There's like, once you get to the next one, it hits all the way down.
Yeah, it's really like, because I agree that like Forest of the Dead is definitely a little bit messy, but one of the things I want to highlight about Silence of the Library and Forest of the Dead, because I'm basically fine with them being ranked here. I think I probably like them a little bit more than you do, but like not that much more, is that I like rewatching it, it's really interesting to see and think about how Steven Moffat sort of like sets up and sort of signposts where he's going to go with the Doctor, particularly with Matt Smith, in terms of like the like, oh, like this is like, you're not my Doctor. Like my Doctor like swaggers off and snaps his fingers and the TARDIS door opens and all that stuff, which is something that like starts becoming a thing. And it's like that specific, it's that like, particularly after the end of Hellbent, where the Doctor snaps open the doors of the TARDIS and then snaps them closed at the end of Hellbent, when he's like puts on his Doctor outfit and gets a new sonic screwdriver and everything. Yeah. To me, like, that line and like that concept of that's like something that he can do now because he's the Doctor, like is so fucking cool. That's like, I don't know how much of that was like Steven Moffat wanting to do that and him always having this idea of like that version of the Doctor and that like idea of him snapping the TARDIS doors open and closed and that stuff. But it plays really well with where that character has gone in a way that's cool.
Absolutely. Like some parts the continuity doesn't make full sense. Some feel super solid.
Yeah.
23 is The Snowmen.
Okay, yeah, sure. I can see this.
The 2012 Christmas special. We all know what's wonky about this one. Clara dies again. She becomes the Kenny of Doctor Who. We get it. But this is such a good episode.
Yeah,
it really is. It is an embarrassment of riches. Like, when I watch it today, it's so easy to focus on what's good because it is plentiful. I love the Victorian atmosphere, like the wintry Victorian atmosphere. It's a great setting. This was our first full appearance of the Paternoster gang together, and they're great here. Like, I think they were overused later, but Strax, Jenny, Vostra, I love them here. They're such a good part of this story. It's kind of like we talked about City of Death in our bonus podcast that you'll hear on Wednesday. There's a character in that, a side character, who I said, I don't think he'd be a great full-time companion, but he's great here. I kind of feel like they never needed to bring Vostra, Jenny, and Strax back, but they were right for this story.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. Moffat's comedy writing is really good in this one, and some of his drama writing. And we get two great British actors for our villain in Richard Grant and Ian McKellen.
Yeah.
That's great. Jenna Coleman makes a terrific second first impression. And it just feels like they haven't figured out the character yet, because this isn't even Clara yet. But she just immediately presents the show with so many new possibilities. The Snowman really feels like the beginning of an era. You have the new TARDIS interior, and there's that shot of Clara follows the Doctor up the clouds, and then the camera follows her into the new TARDIS, and the lights come on. Stunning, stunning moment.
Yeah.
And that's probably the centerpiece of the episode for me. The ending is basically the ending to Pokemon the first movie, where they cry and it saves the day. But it is still just, moment after moment, this is a really well-written episode, really well-acted. It's got those beautiful fairy tale-like moments. And I just think it's great. I like it more than I did at the time, and it's easier to kind of separate now. And I think it's the best of the Moffat scripts from that season, Series 7.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I love the atmosphere and style and tone of it so much. And the like... It feels like an 11th Hour Part 2 in a way. Like it feels like he's come back to that like fairy tale idea that had kind of like gotten away from the show over the course of season 6, and particularly 7A doesn't really have that fairy tale quality that season 5 had. And this has that like just that image of this spiral staircase up into the clouds where this grumpy old doctor lives in his TARDIS.
I love all that.
So good. It's such a good idea. Like, I almost want, like, an alternate universe version of Doctor Who that is, like, that, like, weird-ass, like, Victorian Willy Wonka Doctor Who. Like, I want that, because it's so good.
I mean, you could argue it would have been a better direction for that. Like, long-term, we needed modern Clara to become Capaldi's companion and all that.
Yeah.
But, I could see a series of episodes where, like, that's our new status quo, and he refuses to travel in time, and he's just doing Victorian shit. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
But I also want to credit director Saul Metzstein here. He did a bunch of great episodes. This is, I think, the best visually he put together. It's beautiful.
This also has that running gag about the memory worm and
it's so funny.
So fucking funny.
So funny. I also, in terms of dramatic lines, the quote I picked here because I really love it is the Doctor, he says it several times, I never know why, I only know who. It's a beautiful line.
Yeah.
It's a great story about how the Doctor finds companions.
And
even
why
if this
he
isn't
needs a companion.
Yeah. Even if this isn't the companion he winds up finding.
Yeah.
22 is The Pilot, the Series 10 premiere.
Yeah.
This is an episode I really liked when it aired, but I loved when I revisited it when the Blu-ray came out. I think it's just one of the best companion introductions we have ever gotten. Like, I guess you would say the 11th Hour is an even better one from Moffat because you have Amy there as well. But I don't know. Bill, you're not introducing a Doctor here. You're just introducing Bill. And I love that this story is like firmly Bill's POV, moment one to the very end. And I like that Moffat never breaks that POV because that takes a certain amount of like dedication and cutting yourself off, and he does it very, very well here. I think I like that the way this episode plays with time, where like Bill and the Doctor meet and then go on to have this months-long student-teacher relationship. Not sexual, but you know what I mean. That sounds bad in our current climate. Before she actually, something crazy happens to her with a puddle, and then they have to go into space and have an adventure. That's just so unique and interesting to me. And this whole episode, what I love about it is it plays with the mundane in really interesting ways.
Yeah.
Where like Bill and the Doctor meet as people, not out of circumstance. Like she comes into his office, and the opening scene of the episode is that long, like 6-minute sequence where they're just talking. And we get to know Bill as a human first. And it again feels like Moffat has taken another step forward in how he writes people, particularly women, in that he is foregrounding, like there is no mystery around Bill Potts. She is just a person, and they are so committed to that this entire episode is about meeting Bill as a person. And I love that. And then I love the adventure in the second half. Watery Heather is just a great visual, out of a Japanese horror movie. The whole climax is fun. It's all great, but I just think as a story introducing Pearl Mackie and Bill, who I think one of the best one-season companions there's ever been, Man, it's really, really accomplished.
Yeah. And then, like, it also manages to do that. What, like, it needs to do for introducing this new sort of companion character is, like, being able to see the Doctor from another perspective and through new eyes. And I really like what you said about they meet each other as people, and that, like, for most of the episode, the Doctor's, like, just kind of a quirky professor that works at this university. He's not this alien Time Lord. He's not, like, involved in all this weird shit. Like, that's not a part of it. And it's like, it's slowly over the course of the episode that starts building up, but you get this more, like, sort of, like, relationship with this weird professor that's really cool. And that's just really great. And there's a couple of moments that I just want to point out that, you know, I think we've talked about before, but I love of obviously the shot of when she gets into the TARDIS and it pulls out really, really far and the lights come on.
So good.
So fucking good.
It's in my blurb. I forgot to say it. Yeah.
Yeah. But and all of, like, the process of introducing the, like, mythology and, like, devices of Doctor Who to Bill is really great. Another moment that I don't know if we've pointed it out, but it was a scene I just love so much, and I think about a lot when I think about Peter Capaldi as the Doctor now, is once they've time traveled and, like, travel to that alien planet. I forget what the line specifically is, but it's like they get out and the Doctor just says something really goofy about like lollipops and like this, like, really, like, goofy line, and Nardole says, like, you know, you can be really silly sometimes, and then the Doctor just sort of smiles at him, and it's like that little moment of, like, it's such a goofy moment, but it works so well, and it's something that, like, again, I think when I think about the Peter Capaldi Doctor, I think of, like, that little moment and, like, the little look he gives Nardole.
I just love that we open here also, and clearly, like, a lot of time has passed for 12.
Yeah.
And I like that there's just this big gap where, like, he went off and had lots of adventures and lived a life, and there's, like, missing seasons, but not in a bad way. Yeah. There's just time open for him. I love that. Yeah. All right, 21 is The Caretaker.
Okay, sure.
Written with Gareth Roberts. So this is a co-written one, although I think you can pretty clearly see where Capaldi or Moffat made some contributions. Capaldi did too, but it's a different way. He always does. And this is kind of a spiritual sequel to The Lodger and Closing Time, the two other Gareth Roberts stories, which are more defined by the Craig character played by the
guy who's on the late night,
James Corden, who I wish acted still, because he's so good in these, in those. But no, because and the tie between those is that it's taking the Doctor and putting him in a mundane human setting. And I think The Caretaker is pretty much just as funny as those other ones. My favorite joke is the Doctor in his caretaker lab with a sign that says "No humans" or "Get out humans," something like that. No, it's "Go away humans." And it's like, I love, like, that's totally something the Fourth Doctor would do too, where, like, he's not even realizing that that's a weird alien thing to do. And he has all those interactions with, like, the little girl who stumbles in there. Very funny. But I think what makes The Caretaker not just a fun episode, but a great episode, is that it ultimately goes a lot darker and deeper than, like, The Lodger did, because what it winds up being is that, like a lot of Series 8, it's more about Clara than it is the Doctor, because it's about Clara having these two guys in her life, the Doctor and Danny, right there at her school and having to deal with that. And it leads to some comedy, like when there's the whole blow-up that happens and Danny discovers the Doctor and Clara tries to go, "It's a play!" and pass that all off. Jenna Coleman, very, very funny. But I think when it, transforms into something more serious, this basically three-person character play that we get, it's really good. And I like that, Danny calling the Doctor on his shit. We see the Doctor, how vulnerable he is in that, he's not jealous of Clara in a romantic way, but because she's, like, the only person that cares about him.
Yeah.
And he needs her. And all of that is great. There's some acting Jenna Coleman does in this one that just blows me away. There's this scene after the Doctor and Danny have this big blow-up on the TARDIS, and they both leave, and she's just there alone. And she just looks so kind of wounded and hurt, and it's some of the most human acting anyone's ever done on Doctor Who. And there's also a scene that I think about a lot with Clara, where later in the episode she's with Danny, and they're kind of having a heart-to-heart, and he asks her, "Why do you do it? Why do you fly off in the box with him? The truth, please." And she says, very simply, "Because it's amazing, because I see wonders." And the way she delivers those very simple words is just profound and just a beautiful part of her character. Yeah. And I think this is a funny episode, but also a pretty deep one for defining these figures.
Yeah, I really love this episode. I think I would probably personally rank it a little bit lower than some of the ones we've been talking about, but it's really great. And in particular, is that scene in the middle where everything has gone crazy and Danny sort of, like, is face to face with the alien threat, and then like encounters the Doctor, and Clara has to explain the Doctor to him. And like all that stuff, it's such a cracking fucking scene. Like the dialogue is so sharp, the acting is so strong. I love that at the very end of that scene where the Doctor says, "You finished explaining me to him, you haven't finished explaining him to me," and like leaving that off for like the climax of the episode to deal with. That's a fucking amazing scene.
No, it is amazing. I think you're right, actually. Like, and some of this is just talking through it with another person helps me figure out these rankings. I am moving it down a little bit because I do think the pilot and the snowman are both better.
Yeah.
I am, however, confident on my number 20, and it's going to surprise you, but I will stand for this episode because it blew me away on rewatch, and that is Into the Dalek, written with Phil Ford. Written with Phil Ford, don't want to downplay his contributions, obviously, but this one also, like, this is the first of the co-written ones, and I was watching it, particularly the Clara, be my pal and tell me, am I a good man? That whole sequence. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, Steven Moffat clearly wrote that, and I cannot leave this off. That's a defining sequence. But the whole episode, this is a great Dalek story. It's not the highest one on this list, because I think there's one even better that Moffat was involved with.
Yeah.
But I think this is about as good as it gets for the Daleks in the modern era. I love, there's kind of two premises to it. There's the big, like, bombastic one that pulls us in, which is that the Doctor and Clara have to shrink themselves down and go inside a Dalek.
Yeah.
But then it gradually reveals this second, even more thoughtful notion, which is just the question, what if there actually was a good Dalek? A Dalek who could see and understand the wonders of the universe. And what would that mean to the Doctor? How would he react? And how far would he go to see if that was actually real? And this episode, coming out of Deep Breath, is so essential in defining the 12th Doctor. I completely forgot how ruthless he is in this one. Like, there's that first scene where he saves the woman from the spaceship, and she's like, pointing the gun at him, who are you? And she says, no, you're not going to do it that way. Yeah. And he has this whole thing about, like, I'm rescuing you, you're going to be polite. And, like, during the episode, he, like, knows someone's going to die, so he, like, puts a tracker on him and says, this will save your life, and basically just lies to the guy. But it all comes down to this incredible sequence at the end of the episode where he like he connects his mind to the Dalek. He basically mind melds with it and is saying like, no, see the wonders of the universe as I do. I know you can be better than this. And all the Dalek sees looking into the Doctor's heart is hatred. And we get to that great line near the end. You are a good Dalek.
And then the Dalek turns around with his eye stalk still looking at the Doctor that like goes off like, bitch, please.
It is. Very good. I think it is a defining 12th Doctor adventure. Peter Capaldi is so good in this one, and I think on one level you can read it cynically as like the Doctor couldn't get through to the Dalek, that would, ruin the status quo. But on another level, it's a tragedy. It's a really good story about the Doctor wanting something and not getting it, and that tells him something about himself. And I think it just makes for a story I think I underestimated when it aired, because I remember praising it, but I don't think I fully saw how great it is. I think this is a great fucking episode.
Yeah. This is another one that I'm glad that you're more positive on, because I remember this being another one of those that like I was more positive on than you. And like, yeah, I agree that like having rewatched it now 3 times,
you would have just seen it,
because I just watched it because it's the one before Robot of Sherwood. Yeah, it's really fucking good. I think I would personally put it slightly lower than like some of these, but like we're in like a fiddly part of the list.
The top 20 are all fucking great.
Yeah,
just so
it's
you know.
Really fucking good.
19 is A Good Man Goes to War.
Okay, yeah.
The series 6A finale and easily the best of the Moffat season 6 scripts. I think this is also the most effective of the episode he wrote in terms of the myth making he liked to do. He really liked to lean on that trope, especially in the 11th Doctor era, but it's never expressed as fully or as elegantly as he expresses it here. I think part of that is that we keep Matt Smith off screen for like 20 minutes, and we just keep seeing the Doctor as like this legend throughout the universe. But what's so smart about the episode is that the second half is all about challenging the Doctor on that. That he thinks he has this big victory, and it seems really cool, and then everything falls to shit, you feel it fall to shit, and then River Song comes to call the Doctor on that shit. Yeah. And Matt Smith has to confront it, and she confronts it with him, and it is just a beautiful standout sequence. And for an episode that has so many great moments, and so many of them are big and grand and operatic, my favorite one is actually a really quiet moment you might have forgotten, which is there's this character in the episode named Lorna, who is this soldier who had met the Doctor on some adventure and joined this army just to meet him, because she's his legend. Or he is her legend.
Yeah.
And when she's dying, the Doctor comes and comforts her, And then once she's dead, he doesn't remember her. And he turns to Vostra and says, who was she? I don't know who this was. And I think the work Matt Smith does in that scene, illustrating this doctor who is pretending to be the mythical hero this dying girl wants him to be, that is some powerful stuff. And I think it's emblematic of an idea and a theme this episode had and executed on just about perfectly. And it is one of those that is not at all sullied by the larger season 6 plot, because the Doctor dying has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, because it's concluding the season plot of the first half of season 6, which is with the Amy stuff and all that. Yeah. No, Good Man Goes to War is fucking fantastic. It is. Yeah, it is definitely. I like what you said, that it is this perfect execution of the myth making of the Doctor, and then breaking that shit down. In particular, after watching all the David Tennant stuff. And then getting to that, it feels so needed of being sit down, motherfucker, because you are yes, you are amazing in a lot of ways, but you're not a god, you're still a person, you can't do all these things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Number 18 is The Husbands of River Song.
Yeah.
The 2015 Christmas special.
So fucking good.
It's so good. Peter Capaldi and Alex Kingston only had one episode together. And yet when I think about River Song, I imagine her with 12 as much as I do 11.
Yeah.
And that's not really a knock against Matt Smith as much as it is a knock towards this episode and how fucking good it is. And I do think there is one knock you can make against Matt Smith, and it's not his fault. But Matt Smith, when he started Doctor Who, was 26.
Yeah.
And Alex Kingston was not 26. And Alex Kingston, romantically, next to Matt Smith, never looked right. And I'm not trying to, shame anyone. It's just... that would be weird.
Yeah, the screen dynamic is just weird.
Yeah, and Matt Smith plays the Doctor in such a different kind of, he's flirty, but he doesn't seem like he would settle down romantically. Yeah. Whereas Peter Capaldi and Alex Kingston look like they could be a married couple that you would run into on the street. The eccentric one at a certain point, but, they could be. And so when, 12 proclaims his love for River in this one, it feels so much more real than when David Tennant... I guess David Tennant didn't have to, but it kind of worked the other way around, or Matt Smith would. And I think there's just a gravity with the two of them standing next to each other that you don't get with Matt Smith. Not Matt Smith's fault, just a different kind of thing, Yeah. I think part of that, and we all know the story, that when Moffat went to cast the 11th Doctor, he was thinking of someone older, but Matt Smith was clearly this guy has to be the Doctor.
Yeah.
And I think it just meant that some of the River Song stories couldn't be told as fully as they needed to be, but that's why we have the Husbands of River Song. It is a great River story, great story of River and the Doctor. I love their relationship in this one, and I love how fucking silly it is.
It's so good.
Because this felt like, for Moffat, for the viewers, for everyone, Season 9 was so heavy. We needed an episode that Christmas to just make us feel good. And this episode makes you feel good. It is silly and zany and full of big ideas. It's one of those very Douglas Adams-y episodes of Doctor Who. It totally feels ripped from the pages of Hitchhiker's Guide or something. Yeah. And I love that there's this, duality to the identity thing where River doesn't know that this is the Doctor, and so there's all these fun moments, the best of which is the Doctor saying, let's show him how it's done.
It's my turn.
And doing his own TARDIS.
It's bigger on the inside.
My entire perception of space and time and physics has been recalibrated.
Yeah.
Or something like that. It's so great. But what it's ultimately about, underneath all that humor, is it's about two people who love each other too deeply to admit it. They're too afraid and they're too vulnerable to say so. And the moment where they finally have to lay those cards on the table, this is the quote I have for my blurb on this one, where she goes on this big speech about how when you love the Doctor, it's like loving the stars themselves. And she says, if I ever happen to find myself in danger, let me tell you, the Doctor is not stupid enough or sentimental enough, and he is certainly not in love enough to find himself standing in it with me. Camera pan over to Peter Capaldi, and she looks, and he just says,
hello, sweetie.
What a moment.
Yeah.
What a moment. It's not even the best one, because you have all the stuff on Beryllium at the end.
Yeah.
Just perfect.
Yeah. And then also, because she has that whole speech about, it's like loving the stars themselves, you don't expect the sunset to admire you back. And then after this, hello, sweetie, is like, you are so doing those roots. What? The roots of the sunset? Don't you dare. I'll have to check with the stars themselves. And it's that ability of, that scene, they so connect as, the Doctor and River and, the weird sort of back and forth flirty thing. That was always a thing with her and the 11th Doctor. And, it's the dialogue in that scene is so good. It's played so perfectly. It's shot so perfectly. And then, but the whole, like, last 10 minutes or whatever after they crash on the planet and him setting up, giving the guy the money so that he can make the restaurant
That's so
and
great.
going forward, like, 500 years. Like, all that shit, it's so good. And it just has the most heartwarming ending to any Doctor Who episode ever.
Yep. Because I love that, after all these years after Silence in the Library, this was almost like 10 years later from when that aired, Moffat found a way to honor the continuity of River Song and give them a happy ending. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's...
And that just like, I have the transcript up here at the very end of the episode so assuming tonight is all we have left, I didn't say that. How long is a night on Beryllium? 24 years. And that fucking like it's the corniest, cheesiest fucking mic drop in the history of screenplays, but it's so good.
Because you could only do it on Doctor Who.
Yeah.
You could only do it on Doctor Who.
Yeah, and then their last two lines is she says, "I hate you," and he says, "No, you don't," which was more of a running thing than I remembered rewatching the Matt Smith years. They do that in like every single episode. They have that little exchange. So,
speaking of the Matt Smith years, my number 17 is the time of the Doctor, the end of the Matt Smith years.
Yeah,
and if the time of the Doctor only had the last scene and just that perfect fucking regeneration scene, I will always remember when the Doctor was me.
Yeah.
And the bow tie, he takes it off, it falls slow motion, and then that sound effect of it crumpling.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it is putting the knife in. If it were just that scene, this would still be kind of a great episode. And for a while, I kind of thought it was just that scene, because it is a clunky episode in some ways. It has a lot to resolve. But I think the way it resolves all that is a lot more elegant than I realized at the time.
Yeah.
11 was a larger-than-life figure. Moffat liked to surround this Doctor in myth-making and fairy tale, and I think it seems fitting that his final adventure would not only be his grandest adventure, but the one we in the audience see the least of. Because we see almost none of this adventure if you look at the actual time of it. This one is basically told through Clara's eyes, and I think that's part of why Jenna Coleman really gets to snap that performance into place here, because it's not completely her story, it's the Doctor's story, but we see it through her eyes. She's the POV character here. When she's gone away from the Doctor, we don't see him anymore. And so we keep coming back in this place where the Doctor has chosen to stay for hundreds of years, and we keep seeing him at different intervals, and it throws so many interesting challenges at Matt Smith, and this might be his best single episode performance. He is magnificent in this episode. And I think as finding a way to not just wrap all of the 11th Doctor stories together, but kind of tell us, actually, all of his stories emanated outwards from this last hour. That's a really interesting way to do it, and it makes 11's tenure feel a lot more compact and complete than I maybe thought at the time.
Yeah.
And this episode hit me pretty hard. I think it's a weird episode in a lot of ways. This is not at all like other Doctor Regeneration stories. Most Doctor Regeneration stories are, he's fighting the good fight, he stumbles into some radiation,
someone pushes him off of a fucking light tower or something,
and then he dies. And this isn't that at all. And I think that makes it harder to like in some ways, but also more rewarding when you break it down.
Yeah, it's an episode that should not work,
No.
but it fucking super does. I love The Time of the Doctor. I've seen it 3 times now. It's so good. I like it more and more every time I see it. I think it has this properly epic quality to it. I'm not using that word in the modern parlance. I mean more it is epic, and the little flashes of the story and the adventure you get is really elegantly done, and it's something that it would be very easy for this episode to completely spin out of control and spin apart. But I think that Moffat has the right restraint and keys in on the right moments and has the right delicacy and paints with the right sort of broad enough brush in the right scenes that it just fucking works. And it's a utter miracle to me that this episode is not just good, but that it's fucking amazing. It's one of my favorite 11th Doctor stories. It's one of my favorite regeneration stories. I like how it deals with the regeneration cycle stuff. There's something I said this when we talked about Time of the Doctor for the first time, and I still believe this now. I so love that the first regeneration cycle or whatever of from 1 to 11 with the little extra bits in between, that ends with him having to stay in one place and finally settle down, is so dramatically poignant to me, and yeah, it's just brilliant.
Absolutely. All right, number 16 is the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang.
Okay, yeah.
Great story. We have talked about this episode a lot over the years. It was, in 2010 when this aired, like, put yourself back in that time. Doctor Who finales sucked. They just sucked. Season 1, 2, 3, 4, they're terrible finales.
Especially 4.
Especially Ooh. 4. 1 is the best finale, and it's about the Daleks running a reality show. Like,
Evil Big Brother.
And so this one, it was such a breath of fresh air to feel like as season 5 aired, like, they did it. They did it. They did the big rousing finale, and they did it perfectly. And when I watch it today, there are some issues with this one. I think it's messy in places, necessarily so. I think the first hour is weaker than the second, where the first hour has some wheel spinning in places. Like, There's a lot of stuff in the Pandorica cavern. There's this thing with a Cyberman corpse. It just goes on longer than it needs to, although you do get that great speech Matt Smith gives with the big Murray Gold Q under it. But then you get into part 2, and I think it's such a clever story. It's the apex of Steven Moffat's crazy time travel logic stuff. It's just so much fun. And I think the way it all comes together with the Doctor and Amy and reevaluating and putting a cap, at least on that phase of that relationship, is beautifully done. And the sequence where the Doctor is going back through his time stream and he stops in the room with Amy and gives this little monologue to her is one of Matt Smith's best moments. It's one of Moffat's best pieces of writing. Oh, that box, Amy. You'll dream about that box. It'll never leave you. Big and little at the same time, brand new and ancient, and the bluest blue ever. And the times we had, would have had, never had. In your dreams, they'll still be there. The Doctor and Amy Pond, and the days that never came. That's a fucking speech.
Yeah. But the other part of it that's interesting to me that I sort of noticed more on this rewatch is, like the 11th Doctor and the 7th Doctor are a lot more similar than I remembered until this rewatch, because the other thing about that speech he gives is that is also him planting the seed for how he is able to come back. And it's like those little ways in which you can never quite tell where the 11th Doctor is manipulating people and where he's not. Like how much of that is him being totally earnest and honest, and how much of that is him like in the back of his head being like, this is my get out of jail free card. Like, this is me planting, like, I don't know if this bet is going to fully pay off, but this is me planting the seed in you. And that's like another layer to that I hadn't ever really keyed in on. And I think it's hard to key in on until you have the larger perspective of that era of the show as a whole. But yeah, it's really good. It's really fucking good.
15, another two-parter. The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar. The opening to Series 9. And good God, are these good episodes.
Yeah.
Like, this is the best season of the modern series, and this starts it off on such confident footing. It's one of those stories where I think Moffat's writing is just on fire. He packs it with so many incredible ideas. He's throwing out great lines of dialogue, and like he has extras to spare, pushes every character in the story to these really fascinating new places, and most importantly, it's all wrapped around this really compelling central theme. What if the Doctor, while wandering the universe, stumbled upon Davros as a kid and accidentally created his greatest enemy?
Yeah.
And moreover, what if an older dying Davros remembered that? And that is a great hook for a story. We've talked about this before. The ending is a little too full of double crosses.
Yeah.
But
this is the one downfall of it.
But good God, the centerpiece of this two-parter is those conversations between Peter Capaldi and the actor who plays Davros, Julian Bleach. Those scenes are incredible. And that's without even mentioning all of the Missy stuff, which that alone makes this the second best master story of the modern series.
Yeah.
And it's not even a master story. She's just in it. But, like, I love how she's walking this line between funny and horrifying throughout the 2 episodes. And it culminates in this really evil thing she tries to do, entrapping Clara inside a Dalek. But it feels very in character. But this episode belongs to Peter Capaldi, who makes his entrance riding a tank and shredding the electric guitar, and ends it by debuting the Sonic Shades. This is a good episode.
It's so fucking good. He has the whole part where he's riding around in Davros' chair. It is very funny. But yeah, it is like Steven Moffat has such a good ear for the way that Davros was written in classic Doctor Who, which is like one of those things that is a fucking travesty about the Series 4 finale, that Journey's End is just, Davros is so boring in that story, and Davros used to be, even in Destiny of the Daleks, which is easily the weakest Davros story from classic Doctor Who, Davros is still super fucking interesting, and really well written, and really well performed, and this just is so that character, but pulled off with the sort of like character psychological nuance that modern Doctor Who is more sophisticated at than classic Doctor Who was ever particularly interested in. And yeah, it's phenomenal.
Number 14 is Extremis.
Oh, fucking, it's very good.
Is very good.
This is a very good episode of Doctor Who, Jonathan.
Oh yeah, this is one of those 3 episodes from 12's era, the others being Listen and Heaven Sent, where you can comfortably say Moffat is doing something Doctor Who has never even attempted before. It's just experimental, and it is surreal, and this one is the zaniest of them. It's my least favorite of those 3, but I would accept arguments for re-ranking them. There's so many crazy ideas in this one. You have the Doctor is blind in it. Don't forget that. There's a book that compels anyone who reads it to commit suicide. There's a death cult party at CERN. And there's a nihilistic computer simulation into one of the most unsettling, disturbing, and just... It's all of this is so engaging and perfect and wonderful. The final sequence in the White House where you have a dead president and a doctor facing complete and utter defeat, that's an all-timer. And the conclusion just leaves you so shaken and disoriented. And that's before we even mention that this also has layered in flashbacks to Missy's aborted execution that kind of sets the stage for the larger plot of Series 10.
Yeah.
And I think you could theoretically put those flashbacks in any episode. But they're here because they thematically relate to the other half of the story, which is that in the flashbacks, the Doctor is facing a moral dilemma, and in the modern story, or in the present story, he's facing an existential one. And putting those together is outstanding.
Yeah. It's one of those we were talking about earlier that, like, the story structure of it is crazy because it does have these 2 parallel storylines, one of which is happening in a computer simulation. So, like, the Doctor we're seeing for most of the story and the Bill and the Nardole we're seeing for most of the story aren't even those characters, really. Like, they're computer simulations of those characters, which are paired up with a parallel storyline, which is with the actual Doctor at some untold point before this story dealing with Missy. That seem, like I said, they seem like they should be totally unconnected, but they do have this thematic depth to one another about, like, being on the extremis and, like, what has value and how you demonstrate whether something is quote-unquote real or not. It's so sophisticated. It's so interesting. The storytelling structure is absurdly complicated, but fucking nails it so beautifully. And yeah, that last scene, like, that whole last sequence of, like, the Doctor and Bill in the White House and him sort of talking Bill through what she already knows about being a simulation is fucking golden. Even also just the moment when Nardole sticks his hand behind the projectors and realizes that he's not real. Fucking just one of the most terrifying moments in Doctor Who history for me.
Yep. It's like Super Mario figuring out what's going on and removing himself from the game because he's sick of dying.
Yeah.
That's a great scene.
Yeah.
Number 13 is the episode that was the hardest for me to rank because it's the hardest. And that's because it was both co-written and it's part 2 of a larger 2-parter. And this is the Zygon Inversion from Series 9, co-written with Peter Harness. Could have put it higher, could have put it lower. I leaned on the edge of higher because I think the sequence that makes this a great episode, one was clearly written by Steven Moffat, and I don't think you can do a full accounting of his talents as a writer without accounting for it. And 2 is such a monstrously good scene of Doctor Who that, I mean, it's literally one of my favorite scenes in the history of my favorite TV series. Like, it is an amazing climax. And I think this whole episode is really good. I think it's a really clever story. I like that it gives Jenna Coleman this, like, dual role to play. There's a lot of fun stuff. It's so good that the Zygon Invasion Part 1 just feels reverse engineered from this hour. Like, they wrote this one first, and then we're like, how do we set it up? And so Zygon Invasion feels a little rote in parts, but this one is so good. And there's another scene beyond that, like, monologue we're going to talk about, which is this final scene in the TARDIS between the Doctor and Clara. One of my favorite exchanges between the two of them, where she is joking about, like, oh, you thought I was dead at one point. And he says, longest month of my life. And she's still trying to be cheerful and says, it could only have been 5 minutes. I'll be the judge of time.
Yeah.
What a scene.
Yeah.
But the scene we really need to talk about, and I timed it, it's a little over 9 minutes, and it is where the Doctor gets Bonnie, the Zygon, and Kate Stewart at a table and talks to them about war. And it goes through so many phases. It's easy to call it a monologue, but it's not. It's a dialogue, and it's largely a Socratic dialogue, where he is constantly throwing questions out and challenging Bonnie and challenging her. And, you know, it's another great Jenna Coleman, Peter Capaldi duet, even though she's not playing Clara in that scene. And And the sheer number of steps Peter Capaldi has to walk us through in this speech, the sheer number of shifts in tone and style and focus, it's a challenge in and of itself, but it's the way he makes this all seem like a righteous, cathartic release for the Doctor that makes it a wonder to behold. And the most powerful part to me is nonverbal, because we could quote all of this, but the most powerful part is that when he finally has Bonnie starting to consider peace, he leans in and gives her this little smile of empathy. And the look that spreads across his face is simply unreal. It feels to me like no person should be able to emote that much with just their face. It is incredible. I think in 20 years, when Doctor Who fans look back on this era, this is one of those sequences that they're going to talk about over and over and over again. It's just defining.
Yeah. It's obviously, there's not much more to be able to say about that speech. Like, this is where I think ranking these gets really hard, because there's a part of me that really would want to put Extremis higher than this one, but it's because like, I think there are some messy moments, even like Zygon Invasion is definitely a messier episode, but I think even Inversion is messier in places.
Yeah.
But yeah, that speech is really fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, that moment at the end where like the lighting on Capaldi and everything expresses an age that is really sort of horrifying in some ways, but also reassuring. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very good.
Number 12 is a story I knew I liked, but I didn't know how much I liked it until I revisited it, and that is The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone from Series 5.
Yeah, this is a lot higher than I would put it.
Okay, I fucking love this episode. Like, So Blink is the first Weeping Angel story, and it's this very minimalist, like ingeniously minimalist. And I love for this one, Moffat said, I'm going to go nuts. And it is totally maximalist, and it takes that basic thread of the angels and just explodes it across the canvas. And I think it's insane how many creative and terrifying ideas Moffat packs into these 2 hours. It's jumping breathlessly from scene to scene. Each sequence just ups the ante from the one before. Always finds this like new crazy terror for the angels to enact upon this group. You have them going from they can live inside a recorded image, which almost kills Amy, and then they're inhabiting these long dead statues, and then they're speaking through a deceased young soldier with this creepy voice, and then they're living inside Amy's eyes and forcing her to verbally count down to her own death against her will, which is definitely one of the creepier things Moffat has ever written. To, in the second half, Amy has to move through an entire field of angels while keeping her eyes shut and also being calm enough to let them think she's not real. Like, all of that is amazing. And if all of that somehow wasn't enough, the season's central threat of the cracks in time shows up in the second half just to make it even more fraught. I think this one is a roller coaster of action and of horror. And I know there are like deeper episodes of Doctor Who than these two, but I think there are a few that are as just viscerally creative and exciting. And this one is balls to the wall in the way some of my favorite, like, classic Who's, like The Demons or Inferno or ones like that, just, like, let loose and, like, we are going to throw shit at these characters and see if they can withstand it. And this is one of those ones where I can just imagine Moffat at his keyboard typing gleefully, like, oh, you haven't seen anything yet. I love this one.
Yeah, no, it's really fantastic. Like, for all the reasons you said, I agree. I think The Demons is a good comparison point of that this is just such a good, like, sort of action-packed fucking just, like, adventure episode. But I would put something like an Extremis or Zygon Inversion above it for sure.
Okay.
But, yeah, it's your list. Yeah. Put it where you want.
Number 11. I did not do this on purpose. I swear to God I didn't do this on purpose. Number 11 is The 11th Hour.
Okay.
That was these weren't even numbered when I was ranking them, so that's a happy accident.
Yeah.
But number 11 is The 11th Hour. I don't think I realized how many good episodes Moffat has written until I realized, holy shit, The 11th Hour didn't make my top 10.
Right, yeah.
And you'll see why. I think you'll agree with me when we get into the next 10. The 11th Hour is great. I don't know what more we can say about it at this point. I think it's got some wonky direction in places where they do these weird things with camera movements. Other than that, it's pretty much a perfect episode of Doctor Who, and it just feels so fucking confident. Like, by the time Matt Smith steps out on that roof, is putting the bow tie on, steps through the holograms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, hello, I'm the Doctor, basically run.
Yeah.
What an episode.
Yes, yeah. There's not a lot more to be able to say about The 11th Hour, because we talk about it a lot. There's a good reason we talk about it a lot on this podcast, because it is, like, you know, the model for modern Doctor Who and how to introduce these characters and do this stuff. Yeah, it's amazing.
Number 10 is The Day of the Doctor.
Okay, yeah.
You know, we joked earlier about how it's amazing he brought the Zygons back for this one.
Yeah.
I think there's something amazing about this in that, overall, you could be a lot less ambitious with a story like this, and we'd all be happy. Because it's the big celebratory 50th anniversary episode. All you really need to do is get a couple of doctors together and let them have some fun. And Moffat, I think, went way further than that in this one. In creating the War Doctor and revisiting the Time War and trying to tell a story about something at the core of the Doctor's being that drives him to do things, and revisiting this central piece of modern continuity in order to confront it head on, both to resolve the past of Doctor Who, but also to give it a future. Because I think if you don't have Day of the Doctor, I don't know how many legs Doctor Who has after that. I think you kind of have to do what they do here, or Doctor Who is going to drown in the Time War stuff. But they fix it, and they do beautiful stuff with the characters here. I love how he writes David Tennant in this one.
Yeah.
It's just so funny. David Tennant is so great. Matt Smith is so good because he basically has to feel like the oldest man in a room with John Hurt.
Yeah.
And that shows how good an actor he is. John Hurt is wonderful. I love that we have basically two stories, the Zygons in London and then the last days of the Time War, and it finds this really graceful, intelligent way to make that one big story. Look, this is not an episode that needed to be as good as it was to wish the show a happy birthday, but they so clearly poured their heart and soul into this one, and I think it's just one of his finest hours.
Yeah, and it's just something of where there are like you can have your like quibbles about like you should have used the Eighth Doctor for this and that and the other thing, but it is like looking at the episode standing on its own and like understanding, every Doctor Who fan is going to have their dream version of like what the 50th anniversary special would look like, and most of them would be utter fucking horrific disasters. And this is like, I think this is like putting it in the top 10 is right for Day of the Doctor, because it is utterly astounding achievement. It's a cracker of an episode. Like, it moves at a brilliant pace. It feels like Doctor Who the movie.
That's one of my lines in here. Yep.
Yeah, it's like the way it's shot, the production. It's got that great shot like near the beginning of Clara driving the motorcycle onto the TARDIS. That's just a really good shot.
I literally saw this in a theater in 3D. I mean, it's a movie.
It's really fucking good. But then for me, the moment because I just rewatched this a couple of days ago, and it is the moment that I've seen this like 4, maybe 5 times now. I've watched The Day of the Doctor a lot, because of course I have. Because also, again, this came out on my 21st birthday, by the way. In case you are wondering if I was like genetically engineered by some like aliens to like Doctor Who, probably, I guess so. I don't know. So the moment that made me absurdly giddy when I first watched it on my fucking 21st birthday, and then like I've watched it several times now, and then still, it is impossible to describe how excited it makes me. Is when near the end, Matt Smith starts talking about, I could be a curator. I'd be great at curating. I'd be the great curator. I could retire and do that. I could retire and be the curator of this place. And you just hear this voice from behind, I really think you might. And then you turn around and the camera pans over, and fucking Tom Baker is just standing there, and he hasn't missed a fucking beat. He is just as insane as he has ever been. The Doctor says, I never forget a face, and Tom Baker just says, I know you don't. And in years to come, you might find yourself revisiting a few, but just the old favorites, eh? And then at the very end, he says, who knows? Who? And then he just presses his hand against his nose because he's Doctor Who, and it's who knows. It's the most amazing scene in Doctor Who. I've seen it so many fucking times.
If I'm glad Chris Chibnall cast Jodie Whittaker as the 13th Doctor. She's going to be great. If he had said, you know what, Tom Baker's coming back, he's regenerating into the 4th Doctor again and doing it all over again, I'd be up for it.
Yeah.
He's so good in this scene.
There's that whole part where he says, oh, it's entirely up to you. Your choice, hey. I can only tell you what I would do if I were you. Oh, if I were you. Oh, perhaps I was you, of course. Or perhaps you were me. It's just, congratulations. And then they shake hands, and then Maximus goes, well, thank you very much.
You know what it reminds me?
What does that transaction even mean?
It's so, I like to think they just invited Tom Baker to the set. He just said all those things. They were not written. He just did it, and Matt Smith rolled with it, and we got a beautiful scene out of it.
Yeah, it's so good, and it just connects the show to its history. It's not just like pure fan service. It's executed on this really sort of elegant, like lucid dream level of just like insanity, but feels so perfect for something that is the 50th anniversary of this fucking just bizarre creation that is Doctor Who, and that you have Tom Baker there as if he stepped out of time, but somehow got like aged in the process, but his soul is exactly the same as it was in fucking like 1979 when he was recording City of Death. Like, you know, we like just watched that story, because I watched that story like right before I watched Day of the Doctor. Actually, it was like, fucking, it's just he's just the same, and that shouldn't even be possible. He's a much older man now, but it's perfect. Day of the Doctor is fucking perfect.
Number 9 is The Girl in the Fireplace, where the Doctor snogs Madame de Pompadour, and the 10th Doctor, I think, truly is born.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
This is not. There's a 10th Doctor episode higher on this list. Y'all know what it is. 4 episodes where the 10th Doctor appears substantially. This is the best 10th Doctor episode. Like this, or maybe the season 3 2-parter, Human Nature, Family of Blood. But like,
also one where the 10th Doctor himself doesn't really appear that much in it.
That's true. But like, this is just one where I think Moffat got the voice of the Doctor so clear, and David Tennant, you know, snatched onto something so fundamental in this story, where it's a romantic side to the Doctor, but not, you know, like the Rose romance or something that just feels so weird that, like, no, don't kiss a 19-year-old, like, you know, Cockney girl. That's weird.
Yeah. There's something, and I think part of it is that, like, there's something in Madame de Pompadour in this episode that, like, you can see there being this deeper attraction, like, in her relationship with the Doctor is so interesting because she's such a strange, manipulative woman in and of herself. Yeah. And like historically speaking, you know, and her means of sort of like finagling herself into the court of France and at the king's side is so interesting that, like, pairing that historical figure and this interpretation of that with the Doctor, I think really sort of like brings that romantic element to it to light in a way that most of these kinds of stories just don't work for me.
Yep. This was also the birth of a lot of Moffat's favorite time travel plot devices. Like, a lot of the Doctor and Renette's relationship is a clear precursor to the 11th Hour and things like that. But it plays so beautifully. You know, this episode is 12 years old at this point, and it hasn't lost an ounce of its charm or its emotional impact. It's a really it's a great Doctor Who story. Yeah. That's all there is to it.
There's that part where the 10th Doctor jumps through a glass window on a horse.
That's good.
Like really fucking good. That, like, I feel like, because this episode is both amazing, and I basically agree with its placement here, but it also feels like in some ways Steven Moffat sort of like damned Russell T Davies and the 10th Doctor of like, now you have to do this. Now he has to be the dude who can jump through like a window, it's like through across time on a like white stallion. That's who he is now. And it was like kind of always chasing that dragon of that like romantic hero idea of the character that sort of like damned some of the 10th Doctor's era in a weird way.
Yeah. Number 8, Listen. In my book, Listen marks the official beginning of the greatest creative renaissance Doctor Who has experienced in the 21st century. You know, this was outside of the Christmas specials, the first time Moffat had just come and written a standalone story during the season. And in some ways, Listen feels like a really conscious attempt to return to that level of brilliance he had displayed in the Russell T Davies years. And this episode not only proves that Moffat still had his fastball, but that he had a whole assortment of pitches that he had not ever shown us before. It's an essential story in defining the 12th Doctor and defining Clara's proactive Doctor-esque personality, but I think it's even more defining in how it lays out the storytelling fundamentals for this whole era. It's so much smaller, so much more intimate than what he'd been writing for Matt Smith, but it's also a lot more cerebral and experimental, this sinister, strange, open-ended narrative about a monster that very probably only exists in the Doctor's imagination.
Yeah.
And that is such an interesting, beautiful, crazy thing to me. And this episode is also thematically rich in ways that I think define this whole era of the show. It's dense with so many human themes that cut deeper than just it's a Monster of the Week story. It's a story about connections. It's about what we do when we're alone, how we hide from the world, and how these people come together, and people in general come together and open oneself up to make those tiny, imperceptible strides towards making oneself whole. And I think it's just one of the best hours Moffat has ever written, that Doctor Who has ever produced. And, you know, there were some other ones on this list that, you know, I've lived with longer and I felt needed to be higher. give me a couple more years and a couple more rewatches, and Listen could climb even higher for me.
Yeah.
I think this one's pretty amazing.
I think like probably having like just rewatched Listen, like obviously we'll like have to like look at what you've put above this, but like Listen for me would probably be higher than this. It is so. It is an episode that grows in stature for me so substantially every single time I rewatch it, because this is as with most of the 12th Doctor's run, this is my third time watching it, and there's so much going on because there's kind of like with Extremis, there's kind of two stories happening. There's the Doctor and Clara and like the Listen and going off and like investigating this insane mystery that doesn't actually exist, that the Doctor has just been spending too much time on his own and has been obsessed with this idea of that when you are alone, maybe you're not alone, that there's something else with you based on this dream he had. And while that's going on, Clara is trying to have a date with Danny, and it's her first date with Danny, and she's having to, it's the first time of her being pulled between this normal life and the life with the Doctor, and that getting all mixed up with her like ending up at the orphanage where Danny is, and then meeting Orson Pink and all this stuff, and it's just this big mush of these storylines as they become more tied together as the episode goes on. But it always has this really strong finger on the pulse of these ideas about obsession and fear and how these things drive us and define us. That is, to me, like the core of what Listen is about. And it's a crazy good episode. It's the only thing I remember having an issue about when we first talked about it when season 8 was first airing was the ending where she ends up at the Doctor.
I love it now.
Yeah. Like at the time when like it was unsure where season 8 and like where Peter Capaldi and all this stuff was going to go, and fairly fresh off of Day of the Doctor, which takes some pretty significant liberties with revealing stuff about the Doctor and stuff like that. I was unsure about it. Now I really like it, and I think if that scene is done with the right amount of tact and knowing that it didn't become a running thing that they're going to keep on revisiting, and that's the one time they did it, it works beautifully.
Yeah. I'm calling an audible and moving it higher. Okay. I'll tell you where I've left it, but it's no longer number 8. Number 8 is now, because I've been trying, there's like a recency bias thing that I don't want to give into. But hearing that you feel the same way, I'm like, you know what, fuck it. I'm moving it higher.
Yeah,
fuck it.
Listen is so good.
It's so good.
It's really, really phenomenal.
All right. Listen, we'll tell you where that is in a second. Number 8 is The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances.
Okay,
Moffat's first ever story. I've talked about it before. I love this one. I think it's the closest Modern Who has ever gotten to just doing a 4-part, like, classic Doctor Who story. Yeah. You can so easily imagine this, like, airing as one of the best episodes of the 80s. Like, pick a Doctor, it could work with them. But it's also a really good one for the 9th Doctor and for Chris Eccleston. He's just on fire through these 2 episodes. I love the joy Eccleston channels into the most famous lines of the episode. Yeah. Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once, everybody lives. You've got Rose is also at her best here. I think she's used very well. Billie Piper's great. Love John Barrowman as Captain Jack Harkness. He's awesome in this episode. And a character that I don't think we give enough attention to, which is there's a young woman named Nancy in this story who the Doctor runs into, who's leading a group of orphans during the London air raids. It's better than it sounds. And the actress, whose name is Florence Hoth, who doesn't act anymore, but she is so good in this story. And she and Chris Eccleston together are so great. And I love the scares of this one. I love the setting. I think it's got some really... I think it makes interesting thematic use of World War II. There's a moment where the Doctor explains that he's from the future, and Nancy looks up at the bombers and says, the time travel and all that, I'll believe, but what future? Yeah. That's a great fucking line. This is an amazing story. I just think, in terms of meat and potatoes fundamentals, doesn't get much better than this. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I absolutely agree that, like thinking about the Steven Moffat episodes of like top 10, this absolutely has to be up there. Yep. Another aspect to all of this, because it's like the horror stuff is great. Like Captain Jack is so fucking good in this story. But the other thing is, this is Steven Moffat also sort of like directly starts dealing with the idea of like the Doctor's sexuality in some way, like through that, like the Doctor dances sort of metaphor of like, does he dance, does he not dance, like what, like, and compared to Captain Jack, who will dance with anything, he'll dance with a fucking blade of grass if you let him, like the fucking maniac. But like, I think that's an episode of Torchwood. Yeah, it might be. I don't know. I blocked most of them out. But there's so much of that Doctor Rose dynamic with the 9th Doctor was less like overtly romantic than it got with the 10th Doctor, where it got ridiculous. But it was still a like ever present thing in the 9th Doctor run of like this idea of like how close he's going to be to this woman Rose.
But it was one of the things that I wish Russell T Davies and other writers took a cue from what Steven Moffat did here of like addressing it as like a thematic question and like acknowledging things like he's a 900-year-old Time Lord. He's not a 19-year-old human. There's a huge difference between those two things, and you have to acknowledge and reconcile that in some way. And like, I really appreciate that Steven Moffat tackles it head on. Like, I don't think he doesn't like resolve some massive question about like, does the Doctor fuck or not? I don't know. Maybe he has a granddaughter, so probably. But who knows how Time Lord biology works? Fucking I don't. They like loom people and like weave and fucking lung barrow. It's all sorts of nonsense. But yeah, it's a great episode. It does a lot of interesting things with character with both the Doctor and his companions. And I really like what you say about it feeling like it feels like a classic Doctor Who 4-part serial that somehow got like pulled out of time, then put into this new rebooted series, and does so much to me of convincing me that new Doctor Who could be a thing.
I think this is the highest 2-parter on my list. No, there's one higher. Sorry, but this is like what a 2-parter should be in modern Who.
Yes, yeah.
And like I wish there were more, but like this, yeah. Number 7 is Hellbent, the season 9 finale. This one's really hard to rank separate from Heaven Sent. Mm-hmm. They're not a 2-parter.
No,
and I get
agree.
that. But you kind of want to rank them together. But then you separate them out, and Heaven Sent is a kind of unassailable masterpiece. Hellbent is, by necessity, messy in places, in that it has a lot of places to jump around, but it does that really intentionally. And I think the way it subverts expectations, in that it starts as this beautiful space western on Gallifrey, until you realize the Doctor doesn't want to be here. Yeah. He wants to run away, and he wants to save Clara, and he wants to heal this incredibly broken heart he's been living with. And the rest of the hour is this very, very intimate character piece where the Doctor is flying off the handle. He's railing against the whole of creation in this really poorly formulated plan to mend that broken heart.
Yeah.
And the way Capaldi plays that is terrifyingly beautiful, and the way Coleman plays opposite him is just achingly poignant. And I also think there's an allegory Moffat constructs here where the resolution is the Doctor erases Clara from his mind. And it felt poignant to me at the time, but 2 years later, thinking about it more, it's hit me even harder now. I just recently passed the 5-year anniversary of my dad dying, and I think about, I've been thinking about how distant he's become in my own memories. Not gone, but somewhat faded. All those feelings remain, but a lot of those particulars get lost to time. And that's just life. And that's what this story is about. And that's what Moffat has constructed here. Whether it's the neural block the Doctor uses or just time passes, the people we lose do fade. And there's nothing you can do about that. They recede into memories, and then, as they say throughout this episode, they become stories. And there's this moment where the Doctor at the end of the episode is sitting at the diner telling this Clara he doesn't recognize about all the things they did together. And all these things they did, but he doesn't have that picture in his head anymore. And I saw that, and I felt such a deep pang of recognition, it fucking hurt this time. Because it's deeply sad, but it's also poignant and beautiful. And I think what they capture here is messy because life and grief and loss are messy. And it's a really profound thing. I think I have episodes higher than Hellbent because Hellbent is more, the last chapter of a season than it is its own story.
Yeah.
But it, of course, belongs in the top 10, and it's one of the great achievements of modern Doctor Who.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that line that you sort of pointed out of the Doctor says, every story ever told really happened. Stories are where memories go when they're forgotten. Like that's a brilliant line.
And Clara's response later, you said memories become stories when we forget them. Maybe some of them become songs.
Yeah.
Because he's strumming Clara's theme on the guitar.
Yeah, which links back to one of my favorite scenes in the episode is that sort of in the middle when he's gotten Clara back and they're in the the catacombs under the Matrix and all that shit. And the Doctor's sort of trying to figure out how to jammy open this door or whatever. And Clara started trying to get him to admit, what have you done? What's wrong with you? Because he's frantic and desperate in a way that's very uncommon for the Doctor and particularly for the Peter Capaldi Doctor. And then finally lets out, that he's, went through this whole fucking insane ordeal over the course of Heaven Sent that took 5 billion years or whatever from his perspective. and then she yells at the Time Lords and the Karn lady that's there, and then like turns back to him and like whispers something in his ear. And when that happens, the camera zooms out to the Citadel, and the Clara theme sort of like crescendos. And that's such a beautiful moment because it is this like, because I don't know what Clara tells him. I don't know if like she probably doesn't tell like, oh, I love you, because it's not that, their relationship is not that fucking simple. It's not that like straightforward of like she can just say I love you. And I think it was something where probably Steven Moffat hit that point in the script and had no idea what to write. Like, what would Clara say to him at this moment? Like, what could you possibly say? And the answer to that is like, not to tell us what she says, but like what she says is that song. It is that music, which is the song that he's then playing in the sort of the present day part of the story, is such a beautiful sentiment. And I think there's so much going on in Hellbent that it's one of the, I think, most vastly underrated episodes in modern Doctor Who, because I think a lot of people get caught up on a lot of like particulars with it and not engaging with the fact that the episode is really interested in dealing with these issues as metaphor, not like in it, like this very literal, like as you said, like the memory block is a metaphor for people moving on and like that memory fading as time goes, and the memory block is just this like convenient narrative tool at being able to attack a lot of those ideas. Yeah. It also has like one of my favorite endings ever. Good. Just everything, like just the way it's shot, the music of the Doctor finally getting back to the TARDIS that he hasn't been in since, like, that hasn't been properly in like the actual TARDIS since like near the beginning of Face the Raven, and he's gone on this whole journey and gets back there and puts on the coat and snaps the door shut and all that. It's just beautiful with the Murray Gold theme, which is so good. Yeah. And again, like Rachel Talalay, like at her, excellent. I'm not going to say peak because they're all really good, but we'll displaying absurd excellence in Hellbent. Okay, I have put Listen at number 6 now. Okay. I think hard to rank that next to Hellbent, but I think, again, just with that idea of, like, as a story. They're super different episodes, so yeah. Number 5. I'm so happy we get to talk about it. It's A Christmas Carol. Yes. Number 5. This is my favorite Matt Smith episode. It's my favorite one Moffat wrote for Matt Smith. It's just, I think it's the peak of Matt Smith for me. I fucking love it. It is... with some Christmas specials, whether under Moffat or RTD or soon-to-be Chris Chibnall, you can sense a little bit of fatigue. Like, even if there's a lot of good ideas, like the production of the previous season didn't leave enough time or energy to fully flesh them out. And it is astounding how fiercely A Christmas Carol bucks that trend, as it's not only one of Moffat's absolute finest scripts, not just the 11th Doctor's best episode, but just one of my favorite hours of television, like one of my favorite Christmassy things, because it is like a real adaptation of the Charles Dickens book. It actually finds a way to put that in there, but in a Doctor Who setting where it's a funny episode, but it takes that element of it seriously. Like, it is a Doctor Who Christmas Carol done with fucking Michael Gambon giving a wonderful, beautiful performance where this bitter old man sees his whole past re-examined and altered before his eyes thanks to the Doctor's intervention. The episode is, like, impossibly full of powerful, emotional crescendos to me, and once it reaches that music-fueled climax, it can be hard to, like, hold back the tears. It's a really beautiful one, and I think it was the peak of that first year of Moffat and Smith together, maybe the peak of their whole partnership, because it's just such a perfect episode. It has so many good lines. The one I have in my blurb is, "Come on, we're boys!" And you know what boys say in the face of danger? What? Mummy. It's really love it. Good. Yeah, this is a good one, right? Oh, yes. No, I absolutely agree. Like, it has to be in the top 10. It's a phenomenal episode. It's hilarious. It's heartwarming. It's touching. Like, I think it has, like, things of substance to say. The use of music is fantastic. I also always love early on when the Doctor is sort of, like, is having to sort of figure out what to do with Kazim Sardik. And he says it's like, he's talking to Amy on the communicator, and there's a Christmas Carol going on in the background, and Amy says, "Doctor, I can't hear you. What is that? Is that singing? A Christmas Carol. A what? A Christmas Carol. What? A Christmas Carol." And like the idea occurs to him. It's like, and it's so like the glee on his face of like, I have it. It's the perfect plan. And the thing is, it's a terrible plan. It's so bad. There's so many easier ways to deal with this fucking situation than going through the fucking Christmas Carol with this asshole. Yep, it's such a
great idea. And the thing is, it's so in character for the Doctor. Of course he would do that. He's never going to take the easiest way out. He's just going to do it. Oh, I love it. This is just an all-timer. I love this
also,
one so
just
much.
the idea of the fish flying in the snow crystals on the planet. That's a fucking just like ace Doctor Who idea.
And another thing I like is that 11 and his whole tenure was so defined by Amy and Rory, and then a weird Clara arc. He doesn't get a lot of just like standalones with other people.
Yeah.
I like that this is like Amy and Rory are in it, but they're not the focal point, and it just feels like it's such a different side of 11. Also, nostalgically, this is the first episode of Doctor Who my brother Thomas ever watched.
Right.
And I remember after Matt Smith comes through the chimney and like starts going off, Thomas turned to me and said, "Why haven't I been watching this show?" And I remember when they went inside the TARDIS for the first time, he went, "It's bigger on the inside." And then little Catherine goes, "It's bigger on the inside." And I'm like, this is magic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love that episode. Number 4 is Blink. It's Blink. What else do you need to say about it?
Yeah. I would personally put this a little bit lower. I've never been as big of a Blink guy as other people. I think I'd probably put it in the top 10, but not top 5 material.
Well, then let me elaborate.
Yeah.
A little bit. If all Blink did was help introduce us to the brilliance of Carey Mulligan, it would still be one of the best modern Doctor Who stories.
Sure.
But it does a lot more than that. It has like every Steven Moffat time travel tick in the book. You've got your paradoxes, you've got people traveling to the past and then showing up in the future, you've got events from the future somehow rippling back to affect the past. But it works better than I think anywhere else for him because all those elements stem so organically from the angels, from the villains, and the story progresses in tandem with such a compelling character journey. I think it's pretty much a perfect script. It's like a really good short film.
Yeah.
Like, it's an episode of Doctor Who, and only Doctor Who could pull this kind of thing off. But it is also just its own island of a thing. And I think it tells a really good mystery story that never meanders. It's paced so well. I still find it truly scary, I think because the horror is so intellectual and experiential. It's so well directed. Hetty MacDonald, the other one she's done for Modern Who is The Witch's Familiar, that two-parter, which was cool when she finally came back to do another Moffat one. I think it has earned every inch of its reputation. It's easy to overpraise, but I always go back and watch it and I'm like, no, it's that good. I really love this one.
For me, it's something of like, it's incredibly solid episode of Doctor Who, and I think it's basically a perfect screenplay. Like, I would more or less agree with that. There's just something about, like, I don't think it has like these really high highs for me. Of like, there are a couple of moments. I think my favorite part of that episode is all the stuff with the cop, and then when she goes and visits him when he's old.
Oh, I love
and
that.
It's raining. That's a really great scene. But there's just always been something about Blink that while I think it's an amazing fucking episode, and I would put it in the top 10. It's never quite connected with me on the way that it does for a lot of people.
And I'm still honestly surprised it has such a wide following. It's a weird ass episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah, it definitely
and
is.
maybe that's part of it. You don't need to know anything about Doctor Who to enjoy this one. But I think, it does something very particular and it does it very well.
Yeah.
All right. Number 3. Written with Jamie Matheson, The Girl Who Died.
Okay, yeah. Now we're getting into the shit.
Let me just quote a line.
Okay.
I'm sick of losing people. Look at you with your eyes. You're never giving up. Your anger, your kindness. And one day the memory of that will hurt so much that I won't be able to breathe. And I'll do what I always do. I'll get in my box and I'll run in case all the pain ever catches up. In every place I go, it will be there. This episode is beautifully written. I think the dialogue in this one, at so many points through the episode, is absolutely stunning. It is poetic. You can look at it on the page or hear it from the actors, and it has this texture and grace to it. And it's all doing it in service of a story that is both a great classic-style Doctor Who story and a wickedly smart deconstruction of that kind of story. And that deconstruction is bubbling underneath the surface the whole time as a Doctor who seems disarmingly vulnerable to us, seems more self-aware than usual about how stories like these tend to go. But he gets caught up in it, and he has the adventure, and then something goes wrong. And for every 100 times he's walked away at that point, this time he can't do it. And the explosion of grief and fury at the end of this episode is incredible. It is otherworldly. This is an episode for the ages. It is incredible. Equal praise to Jamie Matheson for this one.
Yeah.
But Steven Moffat's name is on it, and it's hard not to see him in a lot of this writing.
Yeah, and it's just something where it's so Like it's a fairly meta episode of Doctor Who in a lot of ways, but it does it in a very subtle, sharp way, and it is that like those themes, I have some of the lines here from like kind of that middle part, like right around when he starts translating for the baby, where he sort of
here too, yeah.
he turns on Clara, and because this is a scene where like he's basically like he tells them like leave, just get out. Get the fuck, like, get out. Like, that's all you have to do. Like, that solves this whole thing. Just leave, and you're fine. And the village doesn't want to do that. And it's just this scene of, like, it's something that I think season 10 we talked a lot about, of taking these ideas that seems like, how has Doctor Who never looked at it this way? And the Doctor says this thing I love. Suppose I saved it by some miracle. No TARDIS, no Sonic. Just one village defeats the Maya. What then? Word gets around, Earth becomes a target of strategic value, and then Maya will come back. And God knows what else. Ripples into tidal waves until everybody dies. And that idea of that, you know, that the Doctor's like, if I just go stay here and I save this village and I defeat like this powerful alien race, and that's how like history goes, what happens to this planet? Like, I have effects in this world that like I need to pay attention to. But like he's sort of getting away from his doctory mission of like, well, yeah, well, fuck it, but you need to save these people, right? Like you need to stand by them, and that coming back around to the scene that you were talking about, where he says, "I'm tired of losing people." He has this because I just have the scene here too. Also, he has this great line: "I don't mean the war. I'll lose any war you like," and that like he doesn't mind. You know, he's just tired of losing all these people. That then it comes into that great crescendo of him realizing this is why I picked this face.
That idea shouldn't work on paper.
Yeah, it's the most ridiculous meta-ass fucking thing.
But it works so perfectly.
It works so perfectly as this like thing of like, yeah, no, like I need to find myself here and remember that like to like as he says, to hold myself to the mark, that no matter what happens, I'm going to have to try to do the best thing and stand by these people and try to save as many people as I can. It is another, like I said about an episode a little bit ago, like about Hellbent, like this is another criminally underrated episode of Doctor Who, because I think people don't want to engage with a lot of what it's really doing, but I think it is wickedly smart.
Number 2 is World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls, the recent Series 10 finale. I know I went on a whole thing about recency bias earlier, but this is number 2. It just is. It like
So
I don't even know if I want to take arguments on that. It's an amazing fucking 2-parter. It does so many amazing things with its characters, with its sets, with its direction. Rachel Talalay is how is she not signed on for a Star Wars movie? I don't get it. Like all the horror stuff in season 1 or in episode 1, where you see the Cybermen being constructed and the cloths over their faces and the pain they're saying, and you know Bill having to go through this basically body horror episode. That in and of itself is one thing. The second episode, The Doctor Falls, which basically funnels all of these things into this aggressively small-scale finale where the life and death struggle isn't to save the universe, but to get a small settlement of people from one level on a spaceship to another level on a spaceship. That entire spaceship is doomed. There is no way to save the planet. There is no way to save the civilization, but we're just going to buy time for the next fight. And that's why this story is so powerful. It is a concentrated, distilled version of what Doctor Who, character and show, is all about. Helping people as much as you can, as long as you can, whenever that call is heard. And in that regard, this is such a pure test for the Doctor to face. And watching Peter Capaldi play a Doctor struggling to determine and actualize what he believes at his most fundamental core is such a powerful thing to behold. For me, it goes beyond words. The last 30 minutes of The Doctor Falls are this cascade of emotional breaking points. You have the Master and Missy's final moments, to the Doctor's last stand in the woods with the, no, not a doctor, the doctor, and that no stars elegy he gives, to Bill's unexpected salvation, and then the Doctor railing against fate and his own regeneration. You know, I was writing all of this down for my notes, and it's just, you write those descriptions of those moments, and my heart aches remembering them. It is a brilliant episode. And at the end of the day, I feel like the best way to describe it is to let it speak for itself. And do another quote from the Doctor. Winning, is that what you think this is about? I'm not trying to win. I'm not doing this because I want to beat someone, or because I hate someone, or because I want to blame someone. It's not because it's fun. God knows it's not because it's easy. It's not even because it works, because it hardly ever does. I do what I do because it's right, because it's decent, and above all, it's kind. It's just that, just kind. If I run away today, good people will die. If I stand and fight, some of them might live. Maybe not many, maybe not for long. Hey, maybe there's no point to any of this at all, but it's the best I can do. So I'm going to do it, and I will stand here doing it until it kills me. And you're going to die too, someday. And how will that be? Have you thought about it? What would you die for? Who I am is where I stand. Where I stand is where I fall. That's a great episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's one of those things of Moffat working through, trying to sort of pin down what is the essence of the Doctor, like what does he stand for, and that speech is so unbelievably powerful. Like it's beautifully written, it's incredibly performed by Peter Capaldi, and it's just the whole. It's all those individual moments, and it's the whole structure and like the broader like elements of it, and the surprise of. Like in World Enough in Time when Bill is shot, at the beginning of that, and like this sort of like very fun, goofy opening to a Doctor Who episode, and then it like very quickly goes very, very wrong, and it's just a normal situation for the Doctor that just went like instead of hitting like 10, it hit 11. It's like, like I can't just resolve. I can't just pack this up. I can't just solve this easily and get away on my TARDIS. Like this is a real one. It's there's something about that feels like this really pure regeneration story, because it doesn't feel like this like big huge thing of like, oh, fate has drawn me to this, and like time and destiny and all these things have arrived me at this point, which is what a lot like the 10th Doctor and 11th Doctor regenerations feel so much like, and even some classic Doctor regenerations feel like fate has brought me to this point. It was always predestined and all these things. This just feels like the Doctor pushed things slightly too far, and they just got slightly wrong, and I have to deal with it now. And there's something about the naturalism of that is incredibly powerful for me. That is pretty rare in Doctor Who to pull that out. And then, like, everything that is done past that point is done to the utmost degree of excellence.
Yep. And it's still the only season finale Modern Who has ever done that is completely divorced from a larger plot thread. Yeah. Like, you have the stuff with Missy and the Master that's kind of been there all season, but it's not like all season they're hearing about Mondasian Cybermen.
Right.
And then they get there. It's just its own story that's at the end of the season. And what it does is it wraps up all the character stuff, but that means it can just be its own perfect fucking story. And it is truly, truly amazing.
Yeah.
And it is a regeneration story, but with the asterisk, I am glad we have a Christmas special to wrap this up, because if Capaldi like popped at the end of the episode and became Jodie Whittaker, that would be stacking the deck against Chris Chibnall so hard. Because how the hell do you tell the next story if you've just had that, and just the darkness and the insanity of it? There needs to be a buffer, which hopefully Twice Upon a Time will satisfactorily deliver.
No, because it feels like, while this episode is incredible, like it feels like there's stuff to unpack still. It feels appropriate that Peter Capaldi is sticking around. And just that, like, his last stuff on the TARDIS where he says, I don't want to change again, never again, I can't keep on being somebody else. Like, that fucking line, I can't keep on being somebody else, is so good.
And he has to learn away from that, or else that would again be stacking the deck.
Exactly.
It would be horrible if he said that and then regenerated. That's worse than I don't want to go.
Yeah.
Number one.
Well, I wonder what number one could possibly be.
Personally, I think that's a hell of a bird.
Possibly, I think that's a hell of a bird. Yeah.
Heaven Sent. Heaven Sent is like, it goes beyond the purposes of this list.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's the best episode of Doctor Who Steven Moffat has ever written. It's obviously, to me, the best episode of Modern Who.
Yeah.
And it's obviously just one of the great achievements in TV history. I think it is an all-time great episode of TV. The quality of the filmmaking is incredible. Rachel Talalay, Peter Capaldi, Steven Moffat, Murray Gold. I could not find the name of the editor, but whoever edited those last montages, holy crap, the editing in this one is good. The production design, the design of the monster in this one, the shadow that is following the Doctor around. It is incredible. And it's so fucking good, it's almost easy to forget what an audacious idea it is. It is an episode where 3 people appear, one of whom is in a monster costume, one of whom is Clara for 10 seconds, and for the vast majority of the episode, the only person on screen is Peter Capaldi. I don't think any Doctor Who writer has ever thrown any Doctor Who actor a challenge that hard, and Peter Capaldi rises to that occasion stunningly.
Yeah.
This is a great episode. It's an episode I feel like I've lived with since it aired and thought of so much. It is one of those standards I hold other pieces of art up to at this point. And it is, of course, an episode that defines what this crazy show I love so much can do when it is operating at the absolute height of its powers. Heaven Sent is a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's a game changer episode. Like, without a doubt, it's everything about it. And just the storytelling of this grand allegory of grief and of the Doctor having to sort of deal with the loss of Clara and symbolizing that of him as him having to punch through a diamond wall that's like 5 miles thick or fucking whatever ridiculous nonsense they force him to do. And then it takes him 5 billion years and the realization of all of that and the sort of operatic and symphonic quality to it is so incredible that it's not just like extremely stylish. It has a deep, deep sense of storytelling in theme to it that is pretty unparalleled in modern Doctor Who, certainly, and for most pieces of storytelling for me.
And to wrap up this discussion and bring it back to the guy we're talking about, Steven Moffat, one of the things I love about his run is as much as he is indebted to and loves classic Doctor Who, he is also gleefully eager to push Doctor Who beyond those limits. And his run is not about doing what Doctor Who has done before, it's pushing at what it can do in the future. Heaven Sent is an episode that literally could not exist in classic Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
For a million different reasons. It is an episode that could only exist in this modern era with this team, with this writer. And that's why Doctor Who continues. That's why it's a 53-year-old show. That's why it keep going, because it can do an episode like Heaven Sent 52 years into its run. And there's not a lot of shows you can say that about.
Yeah, no, it's crazy, and he's a crazy fucking writer in so many ways. Like,
think about how many great episodes we just talked about.
Yeah, like it's just like how competitive that list gets once you're past like the bottom like 5 or 6.
Yep.
Yeah,
no. So look, we've been podcasting for about 6 hours tonight.
Yeah, no, this is absurd.
Was it worth it, Sean? I had fun.
We had to do it. We had to get it off our chests.
Yeah, no, I think, look, this has been one of the dominating topics of our podcast since literally episode 1.
Yeah.
Might as well send it out with a bang. We will be back next week. We are going to do our review of Star Wars The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
We are going to do our top 10 games of the year next week. It'll come out sometime next week. We'll record it all at once. And then we might take a little break for Christmas, but we'll be back near the end of the year to talk about Twice Upon a Time, end of the Doctor Who Capaldi era and all that stuff. But for now, my voice hurts.
My voice hurts.
We have been the Weekly Stuff Podcast. Doctor Who is cool.
It's 1 a.m.